Can you turn on the system? Are we on? I'd like to call the members back to the committee. We're going to get moving as quickly as possible to try to maintain some semblance of a schedule here. I'd like to ask the next panel, the Ag panel, to come on forward, and for others who are interested, please come back to the committee room. We're going to get started in 1 minute.
Something.
Yeah.
I think we do need to think.
All right. Thank you. We're back in session, and we're welcoming the next panel, which is Agricultural Community Perspectives. Please begin when you're ready.
Co-Chair Pavlik, Co-Chair Huffman, thank you for inviting me here today, members of the committee. I guess I can call you Senator Cogdill and Assemblymember Yamada. My name is Brent Walthall. I work for the Kern County Water Agency. We serve domestic and agricultural water supplies to the areas around Bakersfield, California. We are the second largest water contractor on the State Water Project, and we behind Metropolitan Water Districts of Southern California. The joint committees have asked us to answer 4 questions today, so in the interest of time, I'll answer those 4 questions, and anything else you can ask me. The first is it necessary to enact legislation this year? And the answer is clearly no, it's not necessary. The package of bills while the broad ranging doesn't address the current crisis this year or next year, so it's not necessary. But the question really is it wise to enact them this year? Well, yes, it probably is. And the reason I would say that, there are several reasons, actually. One, there's strong stakeholder interest right now. There's always stakeholder interest in water, but we've never seen it so focused, so broad, and so deep as it is this year. So that gives you fertile ground for legislation, at least for good, strong discussions to reach consensus. There are many in the legislature who are involved in ways they have not been before, despite the attendance at this joint hearing right now. This morning was a very good turnout, I agree. And the governor's asking for a package. So the legislature has the involvement in the will, the stakeholders are all involved, and the governor's asking for a package. So that's good ground for doing that. Also, many of the stakeholders are involved in the BDCP. And that's a group of stakeholders that are environmental interests, agricultural interests, urban interests, the fishery agencies, both state and federal. And those conversations are very good places to reach agreement and consensus on a variety of difficult issues. So some of the necessary foundation for legislation is already being done, and those are advantages that you should take advantage of this session. And then finally, and I think this may be the most important factor, the current crisis really motivates all interests. Whether your interests are the fish or the water or both, it is so bad right now that you can't afford not to be interested and involved. And so I think the current crisis is a big motivating factor for doing it this year. The second question the Joint Committee asked is, what are the most important elements to include in a legislative package? And I'll start with the easy things first. A conservancy seems to have the broadest support, and it would be a good idea for the Delta. And there are some good reasons for that. It should be structured in a way that allows a variety of uses. And I think much of Senator Wolk's bill actually accomplishes that. There are probably some fine-tunings that need to be done there, but generally it's a good bill because what it does is it allows a variety of inputs to that conservancy. It could be used by the BDCP. It could be used by a water bond program set up in a water bond. It can even be used by local HCPs that are being done in and around the Delta. And the ability to have those other local HCPs participate in a conservancy gives it that broad application that you look for in solutions that reach more than just one narrow specific purpose. The second element, and we've heard a lot about this today, is a water bond. Much of the Delta is going to have to be resolved with money and with programs that are not a direct result of the two state and federal water projects. And to do that, you're going to need some funding. So a water bond will be necessary to provide that funding. There's another aspect to a bond that I didn't hear mentioned this morning, though. The Delta is not the only water issue in the state, and it's not the only place where we have a need for infrastructure or for ecosystem restoration. The other areas of the state also need that kind of investment. So a water bond, while it would be helpful to this process, we'll also keep all of those other programs, water recycling programs in Southern California, or environmental programs in the Delta or in the Sac Valley continuing as well. So a water bond could have several purposes, not just for this one, but that would be a very valuable thing. The last thing about a water bond that I think would be most helpful is, were it to be part of this package, it could be providing money next year. So it is the one element that might actually allow us to provide some money for programs and projects to address the current water supply and ecosystem crisis. So it could probably get something into the system quickest in order to help us provide some solutions for the Delta.
Have you seen our bond rating?
Yeah, actually, I haven't. I'm biting my tongue on that one. But the third question is, what issues need to be addressed in the current drafts? I've mentioned this a couple times. I'll mention it again. The current crisis not addressed in the drafts. And I think that may be an oversight. We need to find some way to do that. The federal government, through the stimulus package, stepped up and came up with programs and money that it could fund for both valley and urban projects to help address the immediate near term. So if there's something to add to this package, it would be something that addresses the near term crisis. The last question, and I think this is more a question from you, Co-Chair Huffman, is what's a better plan if this isn't the right plan? I think a modification of this plan is actually the right plan. So this package modified would probably provide the right things. But if there was one central thing I could suggest, it's that it focused very cleanly on the Delta. And we've heard several criticisms today of the BDCP because it's too narrowly focused. I'd like to take the other side of that debate. The CalFed program, which we're all familiar with, or some of us maybe haven't been because it's been somewhat on hiatus for a while, was a very broad program. It included programs from the border with San Diego and Mexico all the way up through Shasta Reservoir. It was so big and so broad that it diffused any of its stakeholder interest into such broad categories that there wasn't sufficient critical mass of support for that program to continue. When we were tasked with setting up something different in order just to fulfill permits for the state and federal project, we decided to be narrowly focused, simply because we'd seen failure on a broadly focused scale. So the BDCP is intentionally narrowly focused because that's where we thought we might be able to get the first step. And if we don't put that first step in place, we'll never be able to go broader. So if I could make one suggestion for modifying the plan at a conceptual level, it would be focus narrowly on the delta and work outward in concentric circles. But if you don't solve that one core issue first, the rest of it may just be cow-fed.
Thank you.
I changed morning to good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair and Chair Huffman and members of the committee. I hope this turnout is not a reflection on the importance of our ability to grow food, safe, healthful food here, but actually a reflection on the fact that the members are actually out eating that healthful food.
Or taking their naps. I didn't say senators.
I'm Danny Merkley with the California Farm Bureau, and we look forward to working with you on a comprehensive solution to develop a reliable water supply for a healthy economy and a healthy ecosystem, and the ability to continue growing our own safe, healthful food and farm products in all areas of California. We look forward to working with you to develop real solutions for all Californians without duplication and usurping existing authorities, to develop new surface and groundwater storage with continuous appropriation, to address the growing needs for water with the population increase, our reduced Sierra snowpack, and environmental demands. We look forward to working with you to improve water conveyance while protecting existing law and area of origin water rights and all water rights that Californians and the state have invested in for many generations, to restore the Delta's ecosystem while taking into consideration the needs for all farmers. And we look forward to working with you on continuing efficient agricultural water use and water recycling. This legislative package includes elements that we believe will hinder economic and Delta ecosystem recovery goals, and the package is lacking key elements necessary for a reliable water supply to achieve these goals. The package, to say the least, is incomplete. We believe the funding approaches in this package will create unintended negative consequences on an economy struggling to recover and thus impede investment in the environment. An unbalanced approach to fees fails to recognize where there is public benefit and the need for public funding. We believe the Delta is in crisis and we must act now, but as importantly, we must act correctly. The groundwater management and water rights are important issues, but because of their complexities, including these in this package, we feel will drag down efforts to restore the Delta and to improve the reliability of our water supply. Additionally, water conservation and the continued efficient use of agricultural water are important issues to work on. But again, these are statewide issues that will only bog down immediate actions necessary in the Delta. We have invested heavily in efforts to promote additional water use efficiency, to address differences between two water conservation bills this year, one of which has been left out of this package. One of those bills takes a planning approach to facilitate additional investment in efficient water delivery and application measures. The other creates a framework, a regulatory framework, that we believe does not work. The Agricultural Water Management Council and the California State University System have proven records in understanding water conservation and use efficiency, but some stakeholders oppose relying on this expertise, and this is unfortunate and is another area of conflict. This package does not address the immediate needs for the Delta, which is particularly dangerous if we continue to experience low rainfall in coming years, and certainly the immediate needs of the state will not be addressed regardless of the outcome of coming water years unless we move forward with a truly comprehensive package to address all the goals. The California Farm Bureau, California Agriculture, Business, and Labor Interests developed a comprehensive plan a couple of years ago that is reflected in a water bond initiative carried by the Californians for Clean and Reliable Water Initiatives Committee. The initiative is readily available on the Secretary of State's website. Things have changed since the proposal was introduced, but this is a solid document from which to begin immediately. In closing, let's just focus on some unsettling facts. Rural communities are suffering from the effects of the drought and decades of inaction. Over 500,000 acres have been fallowed. An estimated $1.2 to $1.6 billion in lost agricultural production, and tens of thousands of jobs in agriculture and related fields lost. These are the issues that really need to be addressed, and the legislative package you have before you does not do so. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Thad Bettner. I'm representing the Northern California Water Association today, as well as manager of the Glen Colusa Irrigation District. Trying to just provide some thoughts based on what I heard this morning, and then trying to give you some coherent thoughts just from a Northern California perspective. I think certainly just thoughts, but also the feeling that comes over to me is the feeling of being rushed. And understand that most of these bills, or some of the ideas that are in these bills, were in your previous versions of legislation. Some of the language in the preprints obviously is language we have not seen before. And so to simply put that before us and the rest of the community and some of the other folks that were here this morning and say you've got 30 days to figure this out, trying to get your arms around it is somewhat difficult. But again, Mr. Huffman, going through the questions you asked, your 4 questions primarily, how important is this package or this solution? I think if this is the package that we saw today, for us, we would like to wait. Obviously, our concern is that we can't afford to get this wrong, and we can't afford to have this process piecemealed. So if that means that to get this right, it means extending over to next session, then we would support something like that. Also, as Brent mentioned, I think other speakers, although we are not part of the BDCP process, we do feel that there is ways to get involved and hear what process is going on there to understand better how ultimately that may play out in terms of a new Delta. Certainly, one of the things we're enlightened by is some of the modeling that's being examined in terms of operations of the Delta, flows, restoration targets, et cetera, which I think have been discussed this morning as well. In terms of the most important elements of a plan, I think you've heard it several times, but certainly a comprehensive solution is in all of our best interests. We're depending on infrastructure that is better than 40 years old, and to simply try and reoperate a system with the flexibility that's needed for the environment as well as water supply will not function under this system. The other thing that has been mentioned, but I also had in my notes, was that the lack of addressing other stressors in this bill. There was, in your staff report, it was noted that there were total of three stressors identified, but yet really this package of legislation deals with one, primarily water. So the questions of invasive species and others, how do you deal with those? And if in fact we are going to look at the system comprehensively, those other issues should be addressed in legislation as well. Things in terms of what needs to be addressed in a plan, as Brent mentioned, we feel like that although this legislation may be heading in the right direction, it does not affect a current crisis. We know going into this next year, unless we get a significant rainfall, the system will be even drier than it was going into this year. And so in terms of actions that may affect addressing the next crisis or the next few years, legislation should address the immediate future. Also, there's a sense in this that all this legislation does is essentially divide up the existing pie. In other words, trying to fix the delta, the ecosystem, on the backs of other areas of the state. And certainly, given these economic times, to put other areas of the state in dire economic straits does not make sense. We also support legislation that should address some of the questions that were also identified in the staff report. Pages 8 and 9 of your report identify several questions. I think there was better than 20 questions in there that the legislation should address. But why have legislation that leaves open questions? You should have legislation that answers questions. In terms of, given that we do have some problems with your package, what we propose or what would be the alternative. Certainly, we support water conservation. AB 49, we'd also support amendments from SB 261 in terms of water conservation. Certainly makes sense. Ms. Pavley's bill in terms of groundwater monitoring, surface water modeling. Although we don't entirely agree with 100% of the concepts in the bill, we certainly agree that surface water monitoring and even the agricultural community has supported a real-time system that would be able to monitor all diversions. We certainly support the State Board and its existing authorities to go through and evaluate watersheds and needs for flows and fishes and streams in the Delta. We support the actions that are currently being consistent in BDCP. We support storage. And then, as I mentioned earlier, other factors in the Delta in terms of stressors need to have a better understanding and presented in quality in terms of effects to the Delta aside just water supply. And then I think one of the things that we have is just we need more agencies to show up. Obviously, they're not doing their job, and certainly providing more legislative direction to do their jobs would be helpful rather than creating a new entity that really it's based on not what the entity does, but who sits on that panel. Thank you.
I think that completes the panel. Let's go to questions or comments from members.
I'll have a question. I believe it was the first speaker and the last speaker talked a little about, we know this is more of a long-term plan, and you wanted to focus just a minute on the current crisis. And is it Brent? Yeah, you mentioned the federal government has been participating. But for both of you, what else would be a short-term kind of thing that could be done? You know, because any kind of bond measure, 2010, 2012, it puts things out by the time you construct something and go through the environmental review process. So talk to me a little bit about current crisis and what can be done.
Sure. I think you heard a little bit this morning about the Two Gates project, which is something we're trying to move forward with fairly quickly.
Two Gates, yeah.
Yes, ma'am, and hopefully have it in place by December. There are other projects that we could be doing in the Delta similar to those that actually dovetail with the biological opinions. For example, the biological opinion for smelt leaves open some discretion on the part of the fishery agencies for how they determine when the pumps need to be scaled back to a certain level. There are better ways of determining when the fish are present than the way currently articulated in the biological opinion. So what we'd like to see is the Department of Water Resources, who has developed a potential entrainment index, which is a much better way to assess when the smelt are near the pumps, be employed as part of the biological opinions. This body could direct the Department of Water Resources to do that kind of study and the Department of Fish and Game to review it, take a look at it and see if it's viable, and if it is, then we could have it, attempt to have the federal fishery agencies look at it and see if they are willing to use that as part of their discretion already under the existing biological opinion for Old and Middle River flows. So there are some things that are construction-oriented, Two Gates, and there are some things that are more institutional-oriented, but all of them could be done, or each of them could be done in the near term.
Understanding this doesn't solve the bigger problems, but
No, it doesn't.
short term, I appreciate. Did you
we
want
gotta
to
get to
add
the
on
bigger
any?
problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think, although we're not going to say they're 100% solution, but water transfer, certainly for moving water from one part of the state, from east side to west side of the Sacramento, San Joaquin valleys is extremely helpful. But we have processes that at times take almost a year to get completed. And so it's very difficult for us to anticipate and try to get a transfer done when a lot of times you miss the deadline. So certainly legislation issues dealing with CEQA would be helpful, or like additional powers of the State Board to be able to approve those transfers in a more expedited form.
Yes, Ms. Yamada.
Yes, thank you to both of the chairs, and thank you to the panel. I'm glad to see a couple more members have arrived, but first I did want to say I find it somewhat disheartening that we were not able to hear these remarks, you know, in the large group that we were this morning. Because for me, having a district that has 10 cities but is still zoned 92% agriculture, it's that urban-rural interface that I think is going to help us advance the dialogue. It always has to be in balance. I think the agricultural community is just really, you know, taken quite a number of hits at a number of levels, the last being Williamson Act. But any other short-term solutions that I know that Senator Pavley already asked that question, but besides that, addressing this recent blue penciling of the Williamson, what are we going to do to address some of these real short-term crises that have been placed upon the agricultural community? Setting aside, I mean, water is the lifeblood, but any suggestions for us?
I mean, the only other one I would suggest that we're trying to do is work on integrated water management plans for our region, and to where to the extent we can match up supply demands with surface water, groundwater, if we can coordinate reoperations with the projects, those are all things that we're trying to do. I think it was mentioned earlier that some of that money is tied up, in the current budget issue, and we understand that. But to the extent that we can move on those projects, we will. And I think that's the other thing is I think the locals are willing to pursue a lot of these efforts on our own. And part of it is, don't get in our way. I don't want to say it's necessarily impediments, but making sure as we move forward legislation, making sure that we're not spending our time trying to address issues in this new legislation, but we still have the freedom to work on the projects and the activities that we're currently doing now.
And I might suggest, I know funding for anything from the general fund is pretty much a no-no in this building, but there are previous water bonds that have been passed, and those monies are still available. You can pass legislation that allocates that money out for very near term, in fact, by the end of this year. And so programs that do aggressive water conservation in areas where it might not be economically feasible but would be valuable in the near term, that could be done. Also, particularly in the valley, but groundwater wells, rehabilitating groundwater wells or installing new groundwater wells where you have active banking projects but need additional capacity. Those kind of things can be quick release valves for a drought like we're suffering right now.
I think we can finally maybe sell bonds again, so.
Maybe. Senator Cocktail.
Thank you very much. I just had a question on the in-stream studies that the bill calls for. I think it has a timeline of 2012. Is that feasible, realistic, going to be tough, impossible from your standpoint?
Well, I mean, I know specifically the state board's undertaking the process right now on the San Joaquin River, and they're estimating, I've heard, 3 to 4 years just to do the San Joaquin, not irrespective of the Sacramento. So those studies are time sensitive, they're difficult. I think, the concern that we have, and also we talked with Delta Vision, was we support, I mean, those activities need to be done, but at the same time, if they're going to end up in change in flows, you have to allow for the locals and projects to adjust to that new flow regime. And if there's no time to adjust those flows, obviously the economic woes we're seeing right now are just going to continue to expand.
If I could just add, the North Coast in-stream flow draft policy that the State Water Board has been working on is a good example of how difficult that is to get something that is real and workable without completely throwing our water rights system on its ear and then trying to figure out how you're going to compensate people for that kind of a take. So I think the time frame is very difficult.
You mentioned several that are underway now. Are there any that have been completed, and how long did it take to get those done? But you know,
I don't know of any.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's not to say there aren't. It's just not an area I'm familiar with.
Okay. Thank you.
And if I might use that as a plug for Senator Pavley's bill, a big part of that reason is we've got a state board that is bereft of resources, and we've got a bill in this package that I think will begin to help address that.
On some of the diversion.
Can I just add to that just 1 second? One thing to look at would be that for the Ag Waiver Program with the regional boards, which was a water user setup program, we feel like we've been able to do that monitoring program, meet all the requirements of the regional board at a much lower cost and lower staffing than the regional board ever thought. And so if we're directing the state board to develop such a program, certainly the water users are willing to step up and craft such a program for them, which we think we could do at a much lesser expense that really meets the objectives.
All right. Well, on that note, we thank you, and I'd like to welcome the 8th panel. Actually, it's not the 8th panel, but it's the 8th item on the agenda. At the 7th, rather, the Environmental Community Perspectives. Good afternoon. Who's first?
I'm first.
Reverse alphabetical order, Zeke.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, Assemblyman Huffman and Senator Pavley and other members here. First of all, let me make it clear, I am not from the environmental community. I represent working stiffs on the ocean, commercial fishermen, and I've also been asked to speak on behalf of some who could not be on the panel today from the recreational fishing industry, particularly the California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance and Water for Fish and others. For the record, my name is Zeke Grader, and I'm the Executive Director for the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Association, and we represent working men and women in the West Coast commercial fishing fleet, including most all of California's organized salmon fishermen who were working up till last year. I want to thank the two committees for calling this hearing today and for the opportunity here to speak. And I particularly want to compliment the authors and their staffs, I think, for the progress that's been made so far in putting together this package of bills. I think we've seen a notable improvement in a number of the bills from the earlier versions that we've seen. I also want to agree, I think it was Senator Simitian who talked about the status quo not being acceptable. Certainly for us in the fishing industry, the status quo is not acceptable. We've seen for the past 30 years a continuing decline in our salmon resources in the state, particularly in the Central Valley system, and of course it all came to a head in 2008 because of the previous dry years and when our fishery was closed for the first time in its history in 140 years of the California salmon fishery. And it also, of course, closed Oregon down as well. So obviously for us, this status quo is not acceptable. The thing we are concerned about, however, is that in a rush to try and fix the status quo, we may not actually make things worse. And that's one of our concerns here, because right now we know that in dry years or even normal years, our salmon populations are down. And we can see a clear correlation between rainfall or delta outflow and salmon production. So, I mean, that obvious connection is there. And we do know that when there's either delta outflow is low, or we have a combination of that in dry years, that salmon production then goes down in the following 2 to 3 years. That's not an acceptable situation, but even more unacceptable would be for us to rush ahead with some sort of conveyance system that might only leave the possibility for maintaining these fish. These were really some of California's first food, to be able to survive at all. A 25 or 30% chance of survival for these resources is simply not acceptable, and I would submit that's even worse than the unacceptable status quo. Now, our salmon, of course, from the Central Valley, as many of you know, this is an important run, the second largest salmon run on the west coast of America, second only to the Columbia snake in size. So it has been a significant salmon run over the course of time. And of course, it affects us not only here in California, where as much as 90% of our salmon catch in the state, commercial and recreational, depends on Central Valley stocks, but for Oregon and Washington, some years 50% or more of their catch is from Central Valley stocks. So it's important coast-wide. Basically, you're looking from San Diego to Bellingham is really almost the range you're looking at for the importance. And what's critical, of course, to that is these fish migrate from their natal Sierra streams through the delta to the Pacific Ocean. And if there's something wrong with the delta, they don't make it. So we can do all kinds of things upstream, and we've done many of them in the past. We've taken out a number of dams in the past number of years. We've put in gravel and done fixes in the upper Sacramento. But those don't mean much if those baby fish can't get to the ocean. And this is the problem we have right now. And we know for the past 30 years, the Department of Fish and Game is actually engaged in trucking hatchery fish because they've seen the delta as a black hole. Well, that's good. That can help the survival of hatchery fish, but it doesn't do you any good for natural runs. And natural runs are critical for us, both for having access to our fish because of the Endangered Species Act, but also because they're critical for brood stock over the course of time to maintain your hatcheries. So it's absolutely critical that we maintain those natural stocks, and we have not been doing that. Now, there are many, and I think even ourselves, that when I first came here over 30 years ago and was basically given marching orders to go work for a peripheral canal, is that I think a lot of us have learned a lot during that period. And I think the biggest thing that all of us have learned is that the delta is not a reservoir. And I don't think you can look at draining it any more than you can look at draining Lake Tahoe to satisfy water uses throughout this state. And I don't think you would do that. It's a living ecosystem. It's an estuary. For an estuary to work, it needs fresh water inflow. That water is not being wasted away to the sea. This is the way God created healthy ecosystems. And that's the way it works. And that mixing of that fresh water with the salt water creates these tremendously rich ecosystems that provide for not just our salmon, but for the Dungeness crab found off the coast. And any place you find river mouths is where you find most of your Dungeness crab production. It's for sole. It's for what we used to have in San Francisco Bay, the oysters and the shrimp. This is, after all, the most important estuary, as I think you've probably heard, on the west coast of North and South America. It's the Chesapeake Bay. It's our Everglades. And right now it's on the verge of ecological collapse. We're about ready to turn it into an inland sea, where I think the fisheries we would look forward to then would be shark and halibut. Certainly not salmon or striped bass. So this is the situation we're in. Now, you've asked about what about this package? How is it going to affect the salmon? Well, I think the first thing we have to look at is the presumption that you can make the two things co-equal. That is, water and the fish. That you can do this, I would say, without first knowing what the requirements are of the estuary. And you've got to know those first before you can even think about conveyances, before you can think about habitat restoration. And we don't have that information. Now, the bills do require that there be these studies. The problem is that you've given it to the Department of Fish and Game. You've given it to the Department of Fish and Game, which has no money, and I would say is hardly a neutral party here. So I think what we really have to do, and I know my time is short here, is to first and foremost is making sure that we have that in place. We know what the Delta requires. Now, the question was asked, well, what about 2012 or whenever you get the studies? The fact is we have studies that have been done, extensive scientific studies that we've chosen to ignore. So I would say if people are worried that the studies are going to somehow delay, we can certainly look back at such things as the State Board's 1988 draft order, which is based on 2 years of solid science. So we have some ideas from that earlier work, how much water is being needed. The thing is we've got to look at it and examine it and adhere to it, not ignore it like they did in 1988. And my time is up, and thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Good afternoon. My name is Kim Delfino, and I'm the California Program Director for Defenders of Wildlife. I'm here today both as a member of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan Steering Committee. I also serve as the chair of the Central Valley Joint Venture, which is a collective of organizations and agencies working on protecting the Pacific Flyway portion in the Central Valley. I'm going to present Defender's overall perspective on the bill package. I'm really going to focus very much just on the Delta bills at this point. To begin with, I want to thank the authors for putting forward these 5 bills. To state the obvious, the solution for the Delta is not simple or easy or quick. But I think that putting forward a package is a start. And it provides the framework to really dig into the complex issues that surround how we're going to solve the issues in the Delta. I think to answer, I guess, one of the questions being posed, we believe it is imperative to find a solution as soon as possible, and the time to fix the Delta is now. In all actuality, the time to fix the Delta was a long time ago, to be honest, and it should not be further delayed. We've heard already about the crashing ecosystems. Zeke very eloquently laid out the impacts to the fishing community and to folks and the recreational community. I can also speak to the bird populations because of our work with the Central Valley Joint Venture. Birds are basically landing in remnants of what was once a very rich and productive wetland system. Species like giant garter snake, San Joaquin kit fox, vernal pool species, riparian brush rabbit are basically clinging to small little pockets of strongholds to was once a very thriving and healthy system. And these species are only going to struggle further as the effects of climate change are being felt. I would, though, caveat my position of urgency by stating that while we desperately need a solution, we cannot sacrifice getting it done right for simply getting it done. The Delta bill package, I think, and this is to answer another question, includes many of the important elements of a solution in some form or another. We are happy to see the in-stream flow requirements in there, the Delta Stewardship Council, the Delta Water Master, sometimes we've been thinking about it as a fish master, Delta Conservancy. We strongly support the concept of beneficiary pays financing program, and we also very much support the fact that the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, if it ever emerges, is to be a natural communities conservation plan. We believe you need to manage the Delta in a holistic and ecosystem-based way. However, while the Delta bill does include many of the elements that we think are absolutely critical for a comprehensive solution, there are significant issues, and you've heard many of them already being spoken. And I'm only going to cover a few things because the time is short, and I'm assuming, well, Zeke's covered some, and I know Barry will cover others, and there will be a more in-depth hearing, I believe, next week. But let me just talk about a couple different things. First, the Independent Science Board. We strongly support independent science. This is absolutely critical. I do think, though, that Professor Mount's comments about the fact that it's a board is a good point to make. It should really be broadened out to be a real program. And it needs to be, there needs to be clarity about how it fits in with existing programs. There's a lot of science going on, and I don't think the bills really clarify that. The co-equal goals issue. I understand why we talk about co-equal goals. I also understand the whole concept of the third leg of the stool. The Delta is a place with many different and competing interests. But I am concerned that the way the mandate is currently written, that it's a little bit confusing and needs some further refinement. In particular, we are concerned that there's a risk that the current configuration, it creates a barrier or an obstacle for achieving compliance with environmental laws, because it creates a potential standoff between environmental agencies and the Delta Stewardship Council. And I don't believe that that was the intention in crafting the bills. But one question that came to my mind as reading through the bills several times was, what would happen if the Department of Fish and Game issued requirements for listed species that the Delta Stewardship Council construed as being incompatible with their dual goal, one of which being water supply reliability? While it doesn't necessarily say that the Delta Stewardship Council would tell the Department of Fish and Game how to go back and undermine the Endangered Species Act, it creates sort of a standoff between the two agencies. In-stream flow determinations. We fully support the effort to direct the State Water Board, although we think they already have the capacity, or they already can do this, to make in-stream flow determinations for the watershed. This is key to providing a baseline for environmental health. But we think it needs to be clarified about whether these determinations are simply advisory or actually need to be parts of permits. We support the Delta Water Master concept, but we do think that there needs to be work done on refining that. It's very sweeping in one manner, having all the authority of the Water Board, but then it's confusing about how it really applies to the operations of the water projects. And then simply just being a geek of the Fish and Game Code, I would note that I would add in that the Water Master should also be enforcing other provisions of the code besides the Endangered Species Act, like Section 5937, which mandates sufficient water flow below dams. And then lastly, and I know I'm run out of time, but I'll make a really quick point, BDCP, because I work on BDCP. I'm going to make a couple. We support BDCP obviously becoming part of the overall Delta plan, and we think that this is a good start here. I want to make a couple points. One, we don't support the certification of the BDCP EIR by the Council. We actually believe this is going to lead to conflict. Frankly, if you're going to look for someone else besides DWR to certify, we would think the Department of Fish and Game could be just fine. Next, we would suggest that review by the Council, by the Independent Science Board and the Council should be done at the draft stage of the BDCP documents instead of waiting to the final stages. We actually think, again, you're creating a sort of standoff between agencies. It would be more useful, frankly, to the Bay Delta Conservation Plan folks to incorporate it in at the draft stage if possible. And then also the Conservancy. We really strongly support the Delta Conservancy as a component. We have to have a Delta Conservancy to make this work. But we do think there is not enough guidance in the current bill to show how the Conservancy interacts with the BDCP Ecosystem Restoration Program, and that there needs to be clearer guidance on how that's going to work together effectively and efficiently. I do have more issues and more points, but we will provide written comments with a lot more detail, but those were just our initial reactions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Final witness.
Thank you, Chairman Huffman, Chairwoman Pavley, members of the committees. Thank you for your time today. I would again like to start by thanking the authors, members of the working groups, and the leadership for their hard work on this package of legislation. I'd like to mention several areas in which we believe this legislation can and should be strengthened. But I think it's important to start by saying that we believe that these preprints represent a comprehensive starting point for long overdue comprehensive water reform legislation. As you've heard, the Delta and California water policy are very much at a turning point. You haven't heard any interest say today, nor do I think you will, that the status quo in the Delta is acceptable. One of the reasons we're at this crisis point in the Delta is that we don't have a plan for the Delta. Nor do we have an agency right now that's capable of writing a comprehensive plan for the Delta. We won't resolve those Delta issues until we meet that need. We believe that we're at a unique moment of focus in the legislature and among the stakeholders to develop a comprehensive package to resolve those issues. And it's very important that we take advantage of this opportunity by passing a package of bills. We believe that the Delta Vision Strategic Plan is an excellent framework, an excellent starting point for that conversation. As you've heard, the authors have worked hard to incorporate Delta Vision's recommendations into this package. In the coming few weeks, we'll provide more detailed recommendations, but I'd like to offer a few key areas where we believe the legislature should focus on strengthening this package. First, you've heard a number of people mention co-equal goals. I'd like to make a point that I don't believe has been made clearly, and that is we need to make sure that the discussion of co-equal goals doesn't lead to confusion and litigation, as we saw in the CalFed program. The CalFed program talked about water supply reliability, didn't define it very clearly, and as a result, agencies misconstrued reliability for increasing diversions. That helped get us into the mess we're in today. We think it's important that the legislature provide more clarity there, and that the Council should be very focused on physical reliability and alternative supplies that reduce our reliance on the system, and should not promise more diversions out of a system that's already overtapped. The pattern we've seen of increasing diversions, we simply don't believe we can continue right now. Second issue, the composition of the Council and the scope of the Council's authority. Very clearly important issues. One issue I'd like to mention there, and that is that we believe the Council should have clear authority regarding planning for infrastructure issues, whether it's not just water conveyance, but flood management infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, infrastructure that has to be woven into a comprehensive plan for the Delta. We think that's critically important. But as Kim Delfino also mentioned, we believe that it's important not to create duplicate regulatory systems, so that the Council would have authority similar or identical to the authority of existing agencies like the State Board and DFG. We'd like to suggest that difference between regulatory and planning authority we think is a critical one. Third, we think it's essential that the legislation restore a credible state regulatory program in the Delta. We think that a Delta Water Master can go a long way in doing that, not just setting standards, but implementing new standards for the Delta. We think restoring state credibility in terms of regulation in the Delta we think is critical. Fourth, BDCP. We believe that it is important to establish a procedure to integrate a final BDCP plan into the Delta plan, and the legislature, we believe, should ensure that the BDCP process resolve the unresolved issues that Delta Vision identified. We believe it's critical that process contain quantifiable goals. We believe that it needs to be an NCCP. We're very encouraged that the administration was supportive of that goal. Fifth, we believe that it's essential to establish an effective Delta Conservancy with a priority focus on ecosystem restoration. Not exclusive, but a priority focus. And then finally, financing. You've heard a lot of mention of financing. Again, one of the reasons the CalFed program failed was because it never had a financing program to implement a very ambitious package. We don't want to suffer that same fate here. We think it's very important that the bill include a detailed beneficiary pays financing system that assures that we have a system of fees to eliminate free riders, to make sure that people pay for the benefits they receive and the impacts they cause, and to allow state and federal funds to be stretched much farther. Finally, I'd like to close with just two thoughts about the efficiency bill, the preprint of AB2. Two recommendations to achieve the governor's recommendation of a 20% reduction in per capita water use by 2020. And I'll close with these very quickly. First, we think it's important that all sectors contribute in AB 2020. The agricultural sector, the commercial, industrial, and institutional sectors, those are key parts of that package. And then finally, we believe it's important that the legislature encourage investment in a full range of alternative water supply tools that reduce our reliance in the Delta. But we really do have to maximize conservation investments, and that's why we believe that we need to find other mechanisms to encourage that full range of alternative investment tools, but they should not all count towards the governor's conservation goal. It was a conservation goal, after all. That said, I will end there and to encourage you to take advantage of this really unique opportunity to improve this package and move it forward. The time for solutions is now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I think Senator Wolk had a question or comment.
I had a question. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask Kim, your organization recently co-signed a letter about your concerns with the BDCP process. Could you, or analysis, could you talk about the concerns that were listed in that letter?
The main issue there was the sending forth of a range of operating criteria that were going to be analyzed as part of an impact assessment. And it really arose out of, there were three columns. And the center column was labeled proposed operations, and we essentially, some of us, particularly the Bay Institute and defenders, and had an issue with it being labeled as proposed operations. We had agreed on the range of criteria to move forward in the impact assessment and said based on that impact assessment result, we would then have a discussion about what the actual proposed operations would be. That was the biggest issue. We also flagged the issue of we haven't had any discussion or agreement upon what should be the environmental baseline, and we didn't believe that D1641 should be the environmental baseline. And that was really sort of the two big issues in that particular letter.
And the letter was signed by yourselves, EDF, and ED, and the Bay Institute.
Right, I forgot EDF.
Are there other enviros who are participating in the process?
Yes, there's, I mean, obviously American Rivers and Nature Conservancy and Natural Heritage Institute are also part of the process.
Okay. I wanted to, thank you. Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask Barry about, are you involved with the NRDC?
We're not members of the BDCP process, but we're certainly following it very closely.
Okay. How would you propose that, I mean, apart from this legislation, if it doesn't move forward, that the legislature engage in the process?
Apart from this legislation?
I mean, let's assume for the moment that none of these bills happen, at least not now, and the BDCP continues. I guess maybe I should...
I'm honestly not sure how to answer that question. We really do believe, as Delta Vision recommended, that governance is the first step in that process. One note I would like to offer, and that is that you've heard some people talk about some of the provisions in this bill as obstacles to BDCP.
Correct.
And we really see it differently. We really see the requirements in this bill being issues, for example, that Delta Vision has identified. One of those issues was looking at a full range of size sizes and alignments. Delta Vision talked about that. And today you heard Lester Snow say that they're now starting to look at tunneling options and other alignments. You heard a discussion of sizing and so forth. We think those are issues that Delta Vision identified some time ago. BDCP has been struggling with some of those issues. We see the requirements in this package as not interfering with BDCP, but really laying a groundwork for analysis that can help that process succeed. In the absence of this package, I'm honestly not sure how to answer that question. I think BDCP faces the same challenges, whether this package exists or not. I think this package really does establish, not just for BDCP, but for the Delta as a whole, a much more comprehensive package that gives us an opportunity to succeed. Right now, I don't think we have an opportunity to succeed in the Delta. We simply don't have an agency with the scope to put together a comprehensive plan that has a chance of succeeding.
Okay. What about involvement of the local communities in the BDCP?
Those communities, from what I understand, those communities have sought to be more involved in BDCP, and they haven't succeeded in doing so. We think one of the key issues one of the key aspects of this package of bills is providing for local involvement, not just a seat at the table, but making sure that local issues are addressed. That's essential in order to address the legitimate on-the-ground issues in the Delta, protecting farms, the 500,000 people in the Delta, as you mentioned, a host of Delta infrastructure that we need a plan for. We don't have a plan for right now. But also, frankly, because and you heard this from Delta counties, the cooperation of those counties is essential to make sure that whatever plan we come up with, whether water users or environmentalists find it sound or not, that plan can only be implemented through cooperation of Delta communities. I think it's very important to make sure that there is a seat at the table, and not just a seat at the table, but adequate scope to consider those local local issues. We're going to make some recommendations to improve that in the package before you right now, but we think there's a solid start on providing that, and certainly very different from the approach without this package.
And just a question for Zeke. The fishing industry is also not represented at BDCP. What kind of assurances would the fishing industry or fishing community recommend?
I think the one I mentioned, I think first and foremost that we take care of the flow needs, the flow requirements of the Delta. And if those are taken care of, and then, you know, once those are taken care of, you can look at a conveyance, you can look at other things. But until that basic thing is the basic issue of the flow requirements to protect this estuary are resolved, to us, it seems premature to be pushing ahead with various projects, including language about developing a conveyance, when we may have to be looking at not more conveyance, but actually reducing diversions from the Delta, maybe looking elsewhere for those sources of water, including desalination.
Thank you, Zeke. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Rambula.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Huffman. An estuary, by definition, as I understand, is a mixture, an area where salt water and fresh water mix. And yet, since European settlement of California in the 1850s or so, we have created an artificial environment where we've channeled water into narrow areas. We rely on levees, which occasionally do something awful and break and flood. And we have invasive species that are increasingly becoming a threat to native species, invasive species that incidentally thrive in fresh water. Why are we insisting on keeping the Delta in an artificial condition when presumably the native species were thriving when it was more of a mixture, an ebb and flow, if you will, of fresh and salt water?
I'll start. You're absolutely right. The Delta right now is a very artificial environment, both because of what we've done to the land and what we've done to the water regime in the Delta. And we believe that we need to move towards a more natural regime from a hydrologic perspective and a habitat perspective. One of the one of the answers to your questions, I think, does lie in the Delta Vision report. We on average, have been steadily increasing the water we divert from the Bay Delta system. And Delta Vision recommended two things. First, they recommended that at times it may it may make sense for us to experiment with a greater salinity regime, more salt in the Delta at some times. They also very clearly recommended stronger spring outflows, stronger fall outflows, more variation in that estuary, as you suggest. We think on balance, it's worth looking at both halves of that equation, but that on balance it suggests that we're probably not going to, as Greg Gartrell suggested, be able to squeeze more water out of that system no matter how we plummet, because we have to start by meeting the needs of a healthy estuarine system. But we're certainly not opposed to looking at, in a rigorous scientific way, the real needs of the Delta to maintain a healthy estuarine ecosystem. On balance, we think, however, it's suffered more from water withdrawal than it has suffered from too much fresh water.
That brings me to, yes.
Yeah, let me, if I can, just add to what Barry has said, is I think what we're asking for is a study not how to restore the Delta to pre-1850, but really looking at what are the flow requirements right now for the Delta as it exists, including with the flow requirements, the timing of those flows, because obviously that's critical, because we know we got more amounts of water outflow than one period of the year than another. I think that's really the foundation. That's not to say that invasives is not a big issue. We've been working on that for years. A number of organizations have been working to try and prevent that. It's not to say that water quality is not a big issue. It certainly is a big issue. But I think you almost have to look at the Delta as if you're building a house. And the foundation for the house here is the water. And then you begin adding the other things. But if you don't have the water to begin with, what you're doing is really just frittering your money away, your efforts, if you don't have those flows first. So I think that's the first thing here, is determine what do we need for a foundation for rebuilding or restoring this Delta.
And I've reviewed a number of the studies that we all are relying on to get to this point, but it seems that the discussion is focused on diversions of water as being the culprit, and specifically the pumping or the water transfers at the southern end of the Delta as being the primary cause of the collapse of the ecosystem. I would suggest upstream diversions represent almost twice as much in terms of volume of water that is being taken out of the rivers before it ever gets to the Delta. And I don't know of anybody that's talking about that. I don't know of any lawsuits that have been filed to get the state to enforce its regulatory or permit process to allow the taking of water before it gets into the Delta. I don't know where the willingness is to deal with the several hundred millions of gallons of water that go out in municipal waste, treated municipal waste, that's poured into the Sacramento River from Sacramento and Stockton, that I dare say has as much, if not a greater, impact on the ecosystem. So I'd like to suggest that when we talk about what ails the ecosystem, we do so in a comprehensive way and not point at one aspect. I represent communities that are endangered as much as the species that you are addressing, and these communities are at the point of blowing away like tumbleweeds because of the impact, because of the condition of the Delta and the failure of us to address it in any meaningful way. So I hope we find a comprehensive solution both for the species in the Delta as well as the human species outside of the Delta.
You make very good points, and I would just simply say, the Bay Delta Conservation Plan is grappling with those very issues. How much water do we need? How are its other stressors? I mean, Brent Walthall was up here. He beats the drum of other stressors continuously. It is a complicated system. This is why it is taking a long time. This is why we are not as far along as I'm sure folks wish we were in the BDCP. So I think all of those issues are trying to be addressed. It is not an easy thing to come up with a solution for that.
And I would just point out that, my folks are looking at the reduction in water that they were originally allocated, they've given back significant portions of water under the Central Valley Project Improvement Act. They have been affected dramatically by the pumping restrictions that have been filed under the Endangered Species Act, which look at pumping as if it's the only stressor. One of the benefits that I see of these bills, if done properly, is that they take a more holistic approach to the conditions in the Delta and what has caused the decline. And I just wanted to point out that it's not just or even primarily the water diversions at the southern end of the Delta. If we're going to be serious about this, let's look at the totality of stressors on the Delta, because there are more than just species being hurt because of the decline of the quality of life in the Delta.
If I could, we very much agree with you that we need to take a comprehensive approach here. NRDC's worked on some of those upstream issues. We've worked extensively on water quality issues in the Bay Delta system. We're working cooperatively with the agricultural community right now on water quality issues in the watershed. Those upstream diversions, you're absolutely right, are a key part of the picture. One note I'd simply like to offer here, that's a note with regard to the extent to which the system really is overtapped. The State Water Board a year ago wrote a letter in which they said that on average there's 30 million acre-feet of water in the Bay Delta watershed, but that the State Board has acknowledged water rights for up to 145 million acre-feet of water. You're absolutely right. If we simply cannot all take as much water out of this system as we have as water users claim rights to, the two projects are the largest diverters, but they're by no means the only diverters. We think it's important to capture that whole picture.
And I would just point out there's a big straw running from San Francisco up to Hetch Hetchy, which never goes into the Delta. Nobody seems to want to talk about that.
We think it's important that all of those be part of the picture. I would suggest that Senator Pavley's bill makes sure it moves in the direction towards universal reporting that we think is essential.
Senator Wolk is going to get rid of the dam at Hetch Hetchy and take care of that, Mr. Rambula. It occurs to me in this discussion, and thank you for those thoughtful questions. It occurs to me we talk a lot about the necessary salinity mix. We talk a lot about the volume of water. We never seem to talk about the direction of the flow, though. And we've got an interesting system that's so engineered that it doesn't flow out; it flows down. And that's another piece of this puzzle, I think, as we think about the needs of salmon that need to swim upstream to get to the waters where they need to spawn. Senator Padilla.
Thank you. I just have a quick, easy yes/no question for the three of you. But no. And my apologies to the committee. I meant to ask this for every one of the panels that have come up, but I've been back and forth between this and another committee downstairs on constitutional reform. So my question is this. I think sort of at the outset, people have acknowledged the co-equal goals. So my simple question is, just for the record, and I'll ask those who escaped me from previous panels on a different occasion, but do you believe it's possible to achieve those two co-equal goals? Yes or no?
If they're defined carefully,
yes or no?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't think you can do it by just looking at the delta. I think you have to look at the whole of the system if you're going to make it co-equal, because there's many of us already said that the delta is overtapped, and maybe we have to look at other areas. And I think Mr. Amela is right, is that you just can't look at the pumps in the delta. We have to look at the whole basin, and to make up for the water shortages that may be needed to make the delta healthy, we're going to have to look at other things, whether it be conservation or probably in the southern Los Angeles basin, that doing much more desal. And we have to go with green desal, not existing green desal technologies.
So was that a yes or a no?
Pardon?
Was that a yes or a no?
That was a
grumpy
really,
yes.
Really neither. I think it's yes,
I
maybe.
was asking a yes/no question.
It's yes if you're.
No, but it goes to my point. I mean, I think we all say, I believe it is possible I'm not saying it's easy, and that was evidenced in your responses. And I'm not suggesting that we're in 100% agreement on how we achieve those two goals. But as we proceed today, over the next several weeks, and in the years ahead, because there's a lot of work that we need to do, I think it's going to be important for us to continuously remind ourselves what the co-equal goals are as a primary focus, and that while we may have disagreements today and work to do on how we achieve them, we can't lose sight of what the goals are, and we can continue to work and come closer together on how we achieve them. But fundamentally, I mean, if other people come to testify and disagree that those ought to be the goals, or disagree that they're even achievable, then this is a very different conversation. So I appreciate you guys answering, even though a couple of you took more than a one-word answer.
Thanks, and that's a great way to close this panel. Thank you very much for the environmental and fishing witnesses from that panel, and we're going to welcome our penultimate panel, other communities of interest, to come on forward.
Good afternoon. My name is Debbie Davis, and I'm with the Environmental Justice Coalition for Water. We are a coalition of more than 70 community-based and nonprofit groups around the state working toward water justice in California. The first thing I'd actually like to do is thank the co-chairs and whoever else may have been part of requesting this panel. I do believe this is the first time we've had a panel of this nature, and I appreciate the opportunity to focus some attention on our communities, our other communities of interest. I believe that this bill package definitely represents progress, and I think that it reflects the attention and the good thinking that resides within this building. And I particularly think it's a huge step forward that Senator Pavley's bill is included in this package. I think that's a key piece. And I think reflective of who you selected to be on these panels, I can tell you there are lots of other folks who are not on panels, but who agree that in Southern California, many people emailed when they saw I was going to speak and said, please convey the message that many people are excited that Senator Pavley's bill is part of this package. Really, I don't know them. So I want to focus my my comments on three elements that I think deserve further consideration. Not surprisingly, the first one is environmental justice. If you look, but I'm going to assume everyone knows what environmental justice is. I've spoken in front of committees enough, I hope that's clear. And jump to how environmental justice fared in CalFed. The Little Hoover Commission concluded that CalFed was an entire failure in fulfilling its environmental justice responsibilities. And that was with language in statute and in the record of decision. And so I believe it would be unfortunate if this bill package moves forward without some clear direction for how environmental justice should be considered and incorporated into decisions that are made in the Delta. The second area I wanted to mention is actually a question. And perhaps it's my naivete. I've only been part of this conversation for about 3 years now. But I'm really confused about what the state interests are that we're serving. We keep using this term over and over, state interests. And when I look at what I think are high state interests when it comes to water, I'm not clear how those interests are being served in this package. In particular, I won't go into the tribal interests in too much detail, but there are many tribal interests that were given up to create the system that we rely on today. And in my mind, if they've made sacrifices, they deserve to be part of the conversation that determines what their sacrifices are serving. There are also subsistence fishers that live in and around the delta. They rely on the fish in that delta to feed their families. I'm not really clear. I think it's a state interest, but I'm not really clear how this package would address those concerns and needs. I'm definitely not clear on how this package serves the needs of the communities in the valley that watch this high-quality water flow by them while they're drinking contaminated groundwater. And I'm also not clear on how this package serves the poor folks in Southern California who can't afford to buy imported water and who are still relying on groundwater and occasionally are forced to buy imported water at a very high cost because they don't have existing contracts. And so they're passing those costs on to communities that simply can't afford it. I also think it's worth mentioning that some things in this package may end up in conflict with other state interests, like the interests of addressing climate change. As the biggest user of energy in California, I think it's short-sighted not to have that built into the considerations that have to be made as we develop this package. And finally, I want to mention this issue of science. It seems that we've pinned all of our hopes and dreams on some magical answers coming out of the science community. And I want to say, I spent a very long time in graduate school learning that science does not offer answers. Science is only a tool. It's a tool that helps you to make choices. And I think what we're pretending as if we can have science make the choices for us. But I hope that you all will take that responsibility and know that there will never be a final answer. You have to use the information and the tools available, and ultimately you have to make the hard decisions between competing interests. And ultimately that's the thing I find lacking most in this package. I do look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you, and I do have hope that with all of the attention and interest reflected in this room, that we can find the right solutions that our children's children can look back on and appreciate. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
I don't know why I brought these notes. Estum Chalitun. Nata yet Yaltina Siyebiya Topiwik the Winnemem Wintu tribe. I want to let you know my name is Mark Franco. Yaltinas is my name in my tribal language. I'm the head man of the Winnemem Wintu, but I'm not here representing the Winnemem Wintu today because, as we've seen with other panels that have come up, there have been representatives from different aspects of the communities, and I'm one person who's here representing the tribes of California. And within the Delta area and the area that the Delta affects, there are probably 100 tribes, both federally recognized, unrecognized, historic tribes, who consider the Delta to be the heart of this state, that consider it to be more than just a place where we can fish and recreate, but a place that's important to the well-being of our mother, the earth here. And so I'm representing those people, and I'm representing the fish, I'm representing the birds, I'm representing the little animals, and all of those who don't have a voice in a co-equal process. I read your bills that your government has put together, and I'm not a stupid person, but it was difficult for me to understand what exactly it was you wanted to achieve. The hearts of those people who wrote these papers, I believe, are good ones. I believe your intentions are good ones. But I think that you missed something. You missed something because you didn't have a tribal voice sitting on your shoulder telling you what that really meant when you said the flow out of the river into the delta and the fish and the needs of those fish. You didn't have that tribal voice of those people who lived in the delta all those years before you people came. And so I had a hard time understanding it. But I was grateful that some of the other panels brought up all the issues that tribal people have been talking about. And I think I'm going to make Zeke Grader honorary member of my tribe because he talked like a salmon. He talked like a fish person. And for that, he told you the things in a voice that I think you'll understand about what those fish are and what they mean to us. Because he's concerned about the fish, not just for the fact that they go out and catch them, or that they catch the striped bass, which that's another story, and they catch all these other fish, not because they use them to sell them, but because that's what those fish's job is. Each of you has a job. The fish has a job too. Some of those fish, its job is to give themselves for the people to eat. But we have to take care of the delta, because if we don't, those people who rely on the fish that are in those small canals and the small areas that come out are not going to have a safe product. They're not going to have a safe relative that they can count on to sustain their bodies. You have heard all of the words from these people. I can't really add anything more to that, but I need to give you an analogy, because those of you who have heard me talk before, and you know I talk in analogies. And this delta is like a big kidneys of this state, right? And all of these things that we try to do is try to do a dialysis on these kidneys, because they're not producing, they're not flushing out the system anymore. We're trying to do dialysis on just the kidneys. But your client, this state, the client, the patient, that this state once was a healthy Indian who ate salmon and venison, and those plants that were there, was healthy, didn't have any of those diseases. But over the years he got fat. Over the years he got lazy. And now you want to do dialysis on his kidneys, but you're not telling your patient, get rid of the fat. Get rid of those things that caused you these problems to get to this point. That's where these bills need to address. Outside the delta, above the delta, below the delta, everywhere from Babonia to the Sierra to Buyumpuyuk, down into the delta itself. All of those areas. And further south, they need to take care of their body. Get rid of those things that have made us sick. This once vibrant, healthy body that we stand on every day. We need to bring it back to that. We had a man here who said he was a designated warrior. Well, I'm your warrior too. And the tribal people of this state will stand with you, and we will help you fix these things. But you have to include us. You have to include the tribes around the delta. Because we cannot help you fight these things, because you can't do it alone. The Creator put that water there. The Creator put those fish there. The Creator even created those little levees and islands that people are now calling home for a reason. So we can help you if you bring the tribal people in, if you let us cure those things that are making the state sick. Don't think that we're standing on the sidelines like, in those Disney movies or those John Wayne movies where we're just waiting for you guys to drive by so we can jump on you. That's not happening. Because when I came in here and I said, Heston Cheliton, I regarded you as my relative. I didn't care if you were Republican, Democrat, Indian. I said I after his name. I don't know what that was. Independent. I was hoping it was Indian guy. Okay, but I didn't care about that. I don't care if you're a man or a woman. I don't care what your skin color is. I am your relative. You are mine, just as those fish are. And so the tribal people will be there for you. And I appreciate this opportunity to step forward here in this one voice before you folks to say these things.
Thank you, Mr. Franco. Questions or comments of the panel? Yes, Ms. Yimei.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to do a little follow-up comment on what I thought was a very wonderful metaphor, or how you described the Delta as the kidney for the failing body of the state of California. But in much the same way as the agricultural community and the farmers are sort of original stewards of land and water and know how to take care of it, the tribal people, the tribal community, was the very original steward of all the land and water, and living on the principles of only using what you really need instead of going to excess. And I think a lot of what your message is that perhaps we need to address some of the excesses that have added the burdens to already, a delta in decline and collapse. So I don't know if you have other prescriptions for us as we go forward. As you may have heard earlier, I said I look at water simplistically. You have to have enough to farm, fish, and flush. But maybe we need to address, not having to build more flushing devices that seems to be sucking up the water from other, maybe higher and more beneficial uses. But do you have any other prescriptions for us as we're going forward?
Well, people have said I'm full of things, and we do have a lot of tribal remedies to some of the things that you're facing. And we had an opportunity to speak with the governor one time, and he asked for solutions, and we gave him some solutions. They didn't do anything with them, but we had them. And as I said, we stand ready to assist you in whatever way. There are people that we could bring in to you who are the tribal people from the Delta, who could tell you what those little fish at the bottom of the pools need. Instead of just looking at the big ones that you can see, what those little ones need. What kind of gravel do they need? What water temperature do they need? What flow, what salinity? Rather than just looking at the big ones. Because as you all are starting to see, you have to look at all of the pieces of the puzzle. And so we do have additional prescriptions, and I can provide that for you.
Thank you.
Mr. Rambula.
Ms. Davis, I applaud you for your concern for in making sure that poor people, low-income people, minority people have essential things like good, clean, affordable water. In our area, the same would apply in terms of air. Our air is very badly contaminated. Would you agree, though, that part of environmental justice includes providing an opportunity for these very same people to make a living, to put food on the table and support their families?
Yes, of course, I would agree with that. I would suggest, though, that we need to ensure that those jobs are allowing people to truly have a sustainable lifestyle. And so I think I might disagree with you on exactly how we get there, but I definitely agree with the outcome.
Okay. Well, I look at the sustainability of the Delta in its current condition, and I suspect we would agree in many respects that it is not sustainable, but it should not be kept, the status quo should not be kept at the expense of people that cannot speak for themselves.
I would definitely agree with that.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the committee? I think then that we will thank this panel and move on to our final panel. This will be Urban Community Perspectives. And I want to thank all the witnesses of the last several panels for pretty much coming in on time at or maybe just after the beeper. So thank you. Welcome. Have you all decided who goes first?
Negotiations underway.
Go ahead.
I drew the short straw. Good afternoon. My name is Roger Patterson. I'm Assistant General Manager at Metropolitan Water District. And to Chairs Pavley and Huffman and the other members, thank you for the opportunity today. I know it's been a long day. A lot of information has been put out. We at Metropolitan certainly appreciate the opportunity to weigh in on this and provide some of our views. We've heard a lot of perspectives here today, and I think it has been a good discussion. It has been continuing to be a good discussion. I guess one of the overall messages that we see here is that this package, it does provide us a framework to move forward. I think what the legislature has put forth here is something that if we want to get to work and try to find a way to solve this problem. I believe, in fact, we've got some things on the table here that that can help advance things. But there are a lot of details in here that cause us some heartburn, and certainly we'll be offering comments and ways that we think can help move things ahead. There's a lot of work to be done between now and when this package would come together. If that's the end of the session, we think that would actually be the best way to try to proceed here. We think that it's critical to get these basic building blocks for Delta governance done this year, particularly the creation of a Delta Council and a Delta Conservancy. We think that that now is the time to do that. I'd like to touch on, in the interest of time, touch on a couple of things we think that are important as we go forward. First of all, on the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, there's been a lot of discussion on that. The BDCP, of which Metropolitan is a partner in creation of that, is I think a very good product that is on its way to achieving that gold standard that was talked about earlier of an NCCP. This is a plan that, if we do it right, can launch us on a path to help turn the corner on the recovery of many of these fish species. And to answer a question that was asked earlier, I believe can be a key piece of meeting that co-equal goal. I think we can do that, of water supply reliability and restoration of the ecosystem. I believe that, in fact, that we can do that. The BDCP is more than a plan, though, and we've seen a lot of plans for the Delta in the past. I mean, it's envisioned to be, I would say, we would like to see it be the cornerstone of the Delta plan that is talked about in the legislation. It will come with contracts and permits and commitments of funding that are necessary to make actions out of what otherwise would be a plan. All of us that have worked on this, whether we're in the water community or the wildlife or environmental community, have worked hard to make some important progress, and we want to see that. We want to see that be able to move ahead, and we would like to see this package of legislation add value to that and make it easier and more durable for the BDCP in the long run. There are some areas in the language that is very difficult, and we will be offering our views on that. We think some of them, in fact, could make it more difficult to get BDCP done on whatever timeline. It's a 5-year process that we're on here, and we're about 3.5 years into it, so we've got 1.5 years to go at best.
Do I take that to mean that you don't think it's going to be done this year? As
well, I think, if I could clarify what Lester said, we are shooting to have a draft of the entire package by the end of the year, and it's called an administrative draft. And any of you that have worked on EIRs or plans of this type, that means that you have all of the pieces in there, but there will be a few holes here and there, and then it's about a year. It's about a year from when you get a good administrative draft before you fill things in and can make it durable. So my view is it's a 1.5 years probably before we're actually there. A lot of these issues dealing with State Water Resources Control Board, I think we need to be careful how we handle those. I, for one, believe that we do need a more functional state board to help us with a lot of these issues. We have areas where we simply don't know what's going on. The state board hasn't had the resources to be able to do some things. Metropolitan's got a bill that we've been working on in that regard. We would like to work with both committees if we move forward and do it on the state board. On the flow issue, and this is one that I would like to engage with the staff in, the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, if it is going to work, has to embody flows that are needed for the Delta to make the Delta work. Now, those are going to come from recommendations of the fishery agencies, recommendations in the BDCP, and perhaps work that the State Board is doing or has done in the past. So that needs to be a key part of what's on the table when we make those decisions. And I think we can get that done, but we need to be realistic about what's doable and what's not. And every flow on every tributary upstream is probably not in the cards to figure that out. I don't think we're there yet. Let me talk about financing for just a second. We at Metropolitan, and I think the other water districts, are ready to spend billions of dollars to make this work. We know that these investments are going to be needed for us for our long-term water supply reliability, and we know that investments in the ecosystem are linked to our water supply. So we've got to be investing in both. We are going to need to have other state and federal funding, however, to make this go. And the discussion this morning about the bond, we think that's appropriate because we're going to have, if we're going to have a package that's going to work, we're going to have a mechanism to make that go, and we would encourage that. And that includes funding to deal with some of the other stressors that we need to pursue to make things go, because it's a comprehensive package we're looking at. There are, in wrapping up, I think there are three critical new institutions that I see in this package we need to have happen. One is the Delta Stewardship Council. Secondly, I would say the Delta Conservancy. And third would be to have a science board and a science program, and I think Jeff Mount is right. It would be a program that would have independent scientists, and we would have a lead scientist to make it work. And I think the work that CalFed has done with their science board in the past is a good handoff to this effort, but we need to get it structured so we don't drop the baton as we're passing it on. So we've provided, I think, our initial comments to the two committees. The Metropolitan Board reviewed the package this morning at our board meeting, and we're ready to roll up our sleeves because we think this needs to happen between now and the end of the session. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Who's next?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman. My name is Jim Levine. I'm an engineer by training. Spent the last 20 years founding and, when lucky, selling companies centered in California. A couple years ago, I was recruited by the Bay Area Council to lead its Water Policy Committee, and about 6 months ago, recruited by a new coalition of business groups throughout California called the Real Coalition, to co-chair its water committee. So I'm here today representing the Real Coalition. I'm a volunteer, not a lobbyist. Our members have traditionally not been engaged in this issue. We've been kind of leaving it to the experts to solve it, but I'm getting calls from board of directors of Google and chairman of Bank of America, and people say we need to really solve this. And when I say solve this, we totally support what I'll say are the tri-equal goals of water reliability, environmental recovery, and Delta sustainability. You can't have water reliability if the environment is crashing. A federal judge will shut down the pumps anyway. You can't have environmental recovery without water reliability. Who's going to pay for it if the state's economy crashes? And we bring a lot of experience in building projects, and you can't build the projects if the locals hate it and they're not involved. I mean, that's just practical, simple, development experience. So I spent over 2 years as a member of the stakeholder group where people from all walks work together, and I really came out of there very optimistic. There was a lot of good ideas that came out of there that bubbled up. I think very few of those actually have been implemented, but I would say probably 2/3 of the speakers you heard today actually worked together and came up with some really good ideas. It was an honor for me to participate. First, I'll congratulate you for taking on the challenge of tackling this, something that the state has not solved in many, many decades. We believe the time is now to do something. There's a coincidence of a water, environment, and fiscal crisis that neither will get better unless we fix all of them. We haven't done a complete review of the details of what you have in the bills, but we will say we do support the ideas of the stream flow studies, getting some data as to what streams really need, measuring what's actually being used. We support conservation from all sectors of society. Everybody needs to pitch in. And I think, of course, it's obvious that we need a strengthened Delta Protection Commission with a greater degree of state interest represented. That will guide local land use decisions. Delta Conservancy seems like a no-brainer. The big thing that I think needs work, that we think needs work, is how are the real big decisions going to get made? And this current system is incapable of making them. The big projects all have third rails that nobody wants to touch, including, I believe, you folks. It's too hard to tackle those things. And there are so many technical details that, frankly, don't get the level of peer review as the analyses are being developed that we're used to when we're spending our own money. And so, therefore, we think that You guys have proposed a Delta Council. We would actually expand it and maybe call it something like a California Water Investment Commission. I think several of the speakers said that to solve these problems, you may need to make investments that make more sense outside the Delta in concert with investments in the Delta. And so we think that you need a body whose sole job it is to value what those investments will really yield objectively. Currently, it's being done by the people who have worked 10 years putting together a certain plan, and human nature is that even when facts change, it's really hard to change the plan you've been working on for 10 years. We think that having this commission that would perhaps have the role of final approval of whatever the state's investments would be, final certification of whatever EIR comes out, would actually accelerate a BDC process rather than hinder it. Right now, just talking to people, there's very little public trust that the amount of money that's going to be spent and the actions that will be taken will actually yield the results we need. And as a result, without that public trust, processes slow down. We think that if there was that commission, and we think you should stand it up right away, something you should do this year, have that commission and understand there's a lot that goes into who appoints who and who ratifies who. I did serve as the Assembly's appointee to BCDC for 4 years, so I understand a little bit about that. But the sooner that commission gets in and works with BDCP to provide some independent review, kind of like a board of directors does to operating executives who may be are so engaged in what they're doing that they may not see the big picture. The sooner that happens, we think the better. We think there's a package of improvements that together will actually solve the problems. If you treat them independently, they probably won't, and they probably won't get approved. We think that we understand that the legislature will probably not want to simply delegate authority to any kind of council or commission like this. I would offer the BRAC model. We worked in base closure quite a bit. That system is one which was set up to deal exactly with a situation like this, where a commission would make base closure decisions, and then the legislature, or in that case Congress, would have the option of vetoing or approving the whole package, but not tinkering with it. As I mentioned, there's a lot of third rails in every decision that's going to be made, yet hard decisions need to be made for the good of all California, and I think that would be a model that we would recommend you look at. Finally, I'll just say my co-chair, Ron Gastelum, from the LA Chamber, I think would like to be invited to participate in the panel on August 25th to talk about a little more details. I'll say there's a billion reasons, probably 10 or 20 billion reasons why people will tell you not to do anything. There's a problem. You can't do this. You can't do that. We would say that it's imperative that we move forward. I think we agree a lot with what was just said by Roger. You guys provided a good working start, and even if there are pieces that can't get across the goal line, we think there are certain pieces, I mentioned those today, that need to. So we're here. We represent, you haven't heard from us before, I think collectively represent the largest section of the California economy. It's interesting so many people want to get engaged from the people I represent now, and I think we're here to help in any way you guys feel it's useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Knaus.
Randy Knaus, East Bay Municipal Utility District. I'm here to tell you that there's much that East Bay MUD likes in this package of bills. And I will tell you in the next breath that something that you know this because of the work you've invested in this and what you've heard today. This is the most far-reaching package of water bills that has been considered probably in our lifetimes, certainly in the last 30 years. I sat in this hearing room 28 years ago representing the State Water Resources Control Board when Senator Ruben Ayala's SB 200 was considered by the legislature. And you know this, and your staff have told you, this package is 100-fold more bold and more visionary and more far-reaching than what the state did 28 years ago. And one of the respects in which it is so bold and far-reaching is that the powers that would be vested in the council and the creation of a water master with all the powers of the State Water Board would have substantial power over every water right holder in the watershed. There are 6,300 water right holders in the watershed. And as you can imagine, that gives us all a fear. All of us, certainly you, certainly in my 30 years in working for the state and East Bay Mud, have seen appointed officials appointed to state regulatory bodies who have not necessarily shared the values that each of you have, or not shared the vision that each of you had when they were appointed to that role. And so that's the perspective that we must look at the council and the water master. What if that council, the membership of the council, or that person who's the water master doesn't share your noble vision, but has a different vision for the future? And so looking at it in that light, concerns that we have are that there needs to be language in the statute that assures that a council, that a water master will act properly, and that the values that you've talked about, that you want to accomplish and that you want to see protected, are the direction that is provided to the council in terms of how they will carry out their duties. So the powers that would be vested in a council, the establishment of a water master, those are areas that need a lot of work. The fee provisions, similarly, would extend to every water right holder in the watershed. As you've heard others testify today, we believe that we're an easy mark. Water right holders are a convenient target, but that there are a much larger class of entities that are also responsible for and share in the benefits of the Delta and should be examined. Our great fear is that given the conditions of the state budget, given the conditions of the general fund, that it becomes too easy for subsequent legislatures, for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years down the road, for this fee to be doubled and doubled again and doubled again, and to use these funds to supplant what had otherwise been general fund programs. And so the fee provisions, in our view, need lots more work and need protections to ensure that this does not become a de facto state water tax. The other major concern, the other area that I want to speak to briefly is you've heard others testify to this morning, and I would echo the view that a levee maintenance program needs more attention in this package of bills. There has to be a recognition that the levee is a place that will be sustained into the future, that all of the multiple uses in the Delta need to be protected for the future. We do not say this for altruistic reasons. We have our aqueduct that conveys 95% of the water that goes to 1.4 million residents in the East Bay that crosses across that Delta. And so the stability and the security of those levees are important. We make an annual contribution of $1.5 million. We've contributed over $15 million to the levee. That's an important component that needs better attention in the bill package. I will conclude by urging you, please do not try and move this bill package in the remaining weeks of session. Please take the time to take this bill package to interim hearings in every region of California, in every community of California. Let Californians, let stakeholders across this state kick the tires, take it for a test drive, sit behind the wheel, get a sense of what's in this package, give you their input, give you the myriad of suggestions about how to fix this bill. I make these comments not in the vein of trying to kill this package, but rather trying to strengthen it and ensure that what you do pass and put on the governor's desk enjoys the broad support of the people and is consistent with the comments that Senator Simitian made at the beginning of this hearing today, that the legislature absolutely wants to restore the confidence of the people of California and boost those numbers above a 9 to 11% approval rating. Let Californians see this package. It's the most far-reaching package that the legislature has considered in 30 years easily. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Mr. Arambula.
Thank you, Mr. Huffman. Gentlemen, we've been talking about, over the course of the day, about the co-equal goals. And admittedly, it's a balancing act to envision how that would work, how we can address the environmental concerns, as well as provide or ensure an adequate and reliable supply of water for municipal and industrial uses. Just to get a sense from your perspective of how that co-equal balancing act might work out. East Bay Mud, you mentioned 1.4 million customers. What's roughly the gross domestic product that your region represents in terms of the state's overall economy?
Mr. Arambula, I don't have that figure. We serve 21 cities and the unincorporated portions of 2 counties, so I don't have that compiled figure.
It's hard to disaggregate, I understand.
Try and get that. I can tell you that approximately 30% of the water that we serve goes for non-residential uses. We have a lot of commercial and industrial sector along the Bay Shore in our service area. So our utility is an important source of water for the engine of the Bay Area economy. With regard to the co-equal goals, let me just note that our water rights were secured in the mid-20s. They were reevaluated by the Water Board in the late 50s, and then again in the mid-90s. The body of law under which we secured our water rights and in which we defended our water rights in the 50s and in the 90s did not have co-equal goals. It did not establish water supply reliability as a co-equal goal. If we would love to have, and I'm sure the other 6,300 other water right holders in the watershed would also enjoy having that kind of statutory guidance to the Water Board in terms of how to adjudicate water rights.
You're very fortunate being first in time, so to speak, in terms of priority access to the water. Those that have less senior rights are struggling, as you can well imagine. But what I'm trying to get at is, what would be the impact if we were not able to provide a reliable source of water for industrial manufacturing type of activities? Metropolitan, for example, how many people do you serve?
We have about 19 million people in our service area. I think about half of the state of California. As far as the economic output, I think we hit 800 billion 2 years ago. I think it's between 6 and 800. We've suffered some recently, but somewhere between 6 and 800 billion a year. And about, we have a pretty diversified water supply coming into Southern California. We get on average about 30%, and maybe a little over 30% of our supplies come from the state project. About a quarter come from the Colorado River, and right at half, just a little under half, are local supplies. So we've got a lot of the economy riding on that. And just one other number. The reason I think we can get at the co-equal goals is timing is everything with water. And we have now, in the Bay Delta watershed, on average, we consume about half of it, and about half of it goes out under the Golden Gate Bridge. Okay, that's on average, but we get real fluctuations in the kinds of years. And so I think this is about timing, and for Metropolitan, about 4% on average of the watershed, the Bay Delta watershed, comes to Metropolitan, so about 4%. And it's a very important 4%. But we can live with that, and we can keep our economy chugging along because our future is conservation and recycling and desal to meet our future water supply needs. And we have Metropolitan's not interested in drying up agriculture like happens in a lot of states around the West. So I think for us, our goal, the Metropolitan adopted this, and it was after some consternation about 3 years ago. We can live with a reliability in that 4% range. And as opposed to the past, we were looking for more from Northern California. We don't need to go there. We can basically cap it at that amount, and we can get by. But it fluctuates, and so you got to take it when it's there. And when you need the water in the Delta, you got to lay off and not take it. And we can make that work.
And you've been very far-sighted in terms of investing your own resources into additional storage facilities, including underground storage. But that presupposes you have the supply of water to put into those storage facilities. So during wet years, there is an opportunity to replenish. And I assume over the last 2 or 3 years, when we've been going through a drought, your reservoir capacity is really diminished. My understanding is metropolitan users, metropolitan urban users are paying more and receiving less water. And that is likely to continue until we have a El Nino or some other type of event that replenishes our supply. But I just wanted to point out that if we don't provide a reliable source of water to you and your users, that is going to affect the economy of the state, which is already in a precarious condition, and any ability on the part of the state to invest money in restoration of the environment in the Delta depends on making sure that we have a healthy economy. So, in fact, the goals, in my view at least, are co-equal. We cannot afford to place one above the other.
Let me just add one more thing, and I agree with everything you said. You know, in times of crisis, it forces people sometimes to take a look at inefficiencies that have been overlooked forever. There are groundwater storage basins that have been contaminated that the pace of cleanup is so slow that 12 blind people could do a better job. And the state has no real institution that is forcing action. And I think this is one of the things that we really need. Hopefully your actions will bring together the state into one voice that can interact better with the federal government to really get movement and free up resources that could be really used. And those kind of efficiencies is what really leads to economic growth. Water reliability is so important. I mean, you mentioned East Bay Mud area where I live, so I know the GDP is high there. Southern California, but Silicon Valley takes a lot of water, and that's a huge economic engine for the state. So there really is no option to not have water reliability.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may just for a second elaborate, I think there are some opportunities here. We talk about green jobs. Recently, I visited a research facility in San Jose, Almaden by IBM, where they're looking at nanotechnology to create filters to purify water. One of the drawbacks has been the high energy demand that's required to push the water through these membranes. Well, with solar or other types of technologies with the price going down, I think it's possible for us to help clean up some of these contaminated underground aquifers and increase the water supply. So there may well be ways that we can help each other, but it all presupposes having the resources to put into it to make it work, and that presupposes a healthy economy, which presupposes water to make it run.
Thank you, Mr. Rambula. Senator Simonian.
Mr. Knauss, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Yes, sir.
In a good way. You mentioned, and I want you to know, I heard you loud and clear, that levee maintenance needed to have a higher priority in the conversation here. Who ought to pay for that? We got a delta, we got a bunch of islands, we got a bunch of levees. the maintenance of those levees is an issue, who ought to pay for that?
Probably all of us. Okay. Probably, as I mentioned in my testimony, we started about 11 years ago making a contribution to the levee maintenance on the 5 islands that protect our aqueducts. It was not an obligation. There was no statute. There was no assessment locally, but we recognized we derived a benefit from the security of those aqueducts, and so we've made investments. And likewise, I think all of us who depend on the Delta have an obligation to help retain those levees, and the state needs to get about the task of identifying the high priority islands. We talked about that earlier, and I know Mr. Mount has done a lot of research. It's time for the state of California to deal with that issue squarely. I've heard at times some say, well, we may just have to let the islands go. We may just have to assume that with climate change, we've got to let these islands go. I don't buy that. My agency doesn't buy that.
If I could interrupt just to ask, should all of them be saved?
Probably not.
Should all of the ones that should be saved exclusively with public money?
Public money, you mean tax, general fund tax dollars?
Well, the 38 million Californians who pay taxes. Yeah, is it a? I mean, I'm sitting here making the argument that this is a statewide concern, but there, we're also talking about the distinction between public benefit, private benefit, shared benefit, and so it raises the obvious question: who ought to pay for the restoration and retention of these levees?
I think that's, and I'm going to take the easy way out here. I think that's an important reason why you need to take this bill package and hold hearings in the Delta, in San Diego, in Bakersfield, in Fresno. You need to have the input of all of these communities and get the best thinking on how to deal with this and build the support and the confidence in every region. I do believe that the water users, ourselves included, have an obligation to help maintain those levees. But as I testified earlier, the fee provisions in the bills need more work. They need more direction to the council in terms of how to identify those who benefit from the Delta, and what are the constraints upon those fees, and how easily can they be increased in future years.
What are your thoughts about the arguments that some make that it doesn't make sense to fund levee repairs when the underlying value, economic value of the land is less than the cost of repairing the levees? There was reference, I think, specifically.
How do we make that judgment, Senator Smitty? We spend millions to firefight when there is sometimes one home in a wildland that's threatened. Well, that's not a good sign. So how do we make these decisions when we have communities and we have livelihoods in the Delta? I think the state bears, and all of us bear the responsibility of as we do with fire protection and helping those who made the decision to live in wildland settings to also invest in the Delta, in the future of the Delta.
Well, but you're not arguing that we ought to let people develop anywhere they want along the Delta and then be responsible for the cost of maintaining that?
No.
Okay. Thank you. I told you I'd put you on the spot. I hope you feel that I have, and I'm happy that I was able to ask you those questions rather than have you ask me those questions.
Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Pavley.
Yes, I think it was the Roger Patterson that I was going to direct my questions to. You're involved in the whole stakeholder process in the BDCP. The NCCP, as that moves forward, have all the stakeholders committed to completing that, and how is that being funded?
Senator Pavley, it's being the funding is being put up by the water users because, frankly, there was no other funding that the state had to do it.
true.
So we put the money up to do the planning.
So that would mean, like myself as a Metropolitan Water District ratepayer?
Yeah, and that is public money, by the way. Water users are public
And
entities.
the only one up here, may I add?
Well, there are other water users kicking in as well. So it's being funded basically by the contractors. It's probably about $15 million through the process.
And is that running on a parallel track with the completion of the BDCP? How does that work? I mean, you have the EIR process, and if you could fold into that greater question on the in-stream flow studies, how those are being completed, because at the end of the day, that's going to be one of those threshold questions on how much water generally will there be in the Delta, how much do we need for ecosystems, how much can be exported, while I'm looking at more regional solutions as well to put less pressure on the Delta exports. So.
Okay, it's sort of all one. It's kind of all one process. There's about $15 million, I think, that's funding the activities that the steering committee is carrying out and the BDCP. So that's all of the meetings, steering committee, and all the webcasts and all the consultants and whatever. So that's going on, and the water users are putting that up. The EIR, EIS process and all of the studies that include alternatives and looking at tunnels and sizes and screens and habitat and all of that is about $150 million. And the water users are putting all of that up as well. So that's about a lot of money.
Being the only ratepayer up here. And the timeline for all of that, it's all moving forward as well as the in-stream flow studies. What is the timeline as you see it?
Okay, on the in-stream flow studies, I'm not quite sure what that is.
Well, a science review on how much water we need in the Delta to accomplish the two equal goals, I suppose.
Okay. The flow needs in the Delta. I know we sometimes call in-stream flows in the Delta. The flow needs in the Delta is part of this analysis, and it's a difficult process because it's hard to really know, but it is a key part of the process. So that is being funded partly by the water user money that's put up, but DFG, and should have asked Don Cook this, I guess, Department of Fish and Game has some, I think it's Prop 84 money that was available to fund certain activities they had in the Delta, and I think they're using, if it's not Prop 84, they have some bond money to do the flow study.
Borrowing from CalFed monies or something?
Yeah, so they have some money to do that, and they are working on those issues. And I think we're putting $3 million a year that the water users are providing the fishery agencies too, because we want to keep things moving along.
And the timeline as you see it?
The timeline as I see it is that the first kind of package of the BDCP, which is kind of what this is coming into, the first draft of the package will be available, I think, by the end of this year. And then it is, I would say, a year before you can get through all of the process and all of the analysis. We've already had 3 independent science panels that are set up, so there's an ongoing panel, and there will be additional of those that will be done as it goes forward. So it's as I said earlier, it's about 5 years from start to finish, which sounds like a long time, but for a habitat conservation plan and an NCCP, that's actually moving along.
Moving fast.
5 years.
Final question, and the role of the future Delta Protection Council and or legislature in that process? That's an open-ended question. What do you see as the role? As final approval or a board of directors kind of review by the Delta Protection Commission? Several people today are Delta Protection Council, Stewardship Council, as Lois would like to call it, or
the bill spells it.
Or
it's in the bill.
Stewardship Council. She won that one. Good job. And or several people have suggested there needs to be a role for the legislature in the process, either base closure model or something like that. From
me,
an MWD
yeah,
perspective.
to us, I think that's one of the things that we need to figure out here. As I read the package, there are kind of three notions in here related to how BDCP can get sanctioned, if you will, to become part of a broader package. There's some criteria based that if you meet the criteria, it looks like you might have met the standard. There's a certification of EIR, which is another way to do it, and then there's a more affirmative a decision by the council, and we need to sort through, I think, the best way to do that. I think we've got the makings of something here that can provide, a way to advance the BDCP, which is only a part of the Delta plan.
Right.
So.
If I might just follow a little, Mr. Patterson, when would the State Water Board approve the in-stream flow assumptions that you're talking about?
They would approve it at the end. So they would not give a green light to anything doing with BDCP until they had the whole package, including the flows, and they would have to make a decision. And I would see that would occur at least two ways. They would set the flows as part of a new water quality control plan in the Delta, and then I think they would probably and should condition the water rights of the state project and the federal project.
Don't you think you would want to have their blessing on the in-stream flow assumptions before you decide infrastructure and operating parameters and the financing plan based on water sales extending out years and years?
I don't think you can do that. I think you have to put the whole package together that has flows, because flows depend on infrastructure. The flows are quite different. I mean, you've got the Delta outflows, and depending on whether you have conveyance or not, then you have to have certain flows there. You have South Delta flows. So I think you have to build the package. Flows is a key ingredient, and then they have to make a judgment on that. So you can't do anything until you get that, but it's...
I'm not sure I follow that at all. It seems to me that the bypass flows, if you're talking about a new point of diversion, have to be known in advance. You got to know how much water do we need to leave in the system, how much will the state board require stay in the river, stay on through to the Delta, before we can figure out how much we can take out and in what method we can take it over time.
Well,
why would that not be the...
Well, it is. It's part of the package. A key part of what the plan needs to look like is the flows and how much of the bypass flows are going to be. But you can't decide those until you kind of know what the rest of the moving parts are. And I'll give you an example. The modeling that we have done show that the habitat restoration elements in the Yolo bypass and the area, that general area, can change as much as 2,000 second feet the bypass requirements. And so, at least this is my view, you need to build the package so you can make an informed decision on what the right flows are, or we'll get it wrong again. We need to have the
Sounds a little like ready, shoot, aim to me, but
I'm
maybe
suggesting
we could talk
ready,
some more on...
aim, then fire.
All right. Well, I want to thank this panel, and do we? Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Wolk had some more. Please, Senator Wolk, I did not mean.
Yeah, no, but you were doing a great job.
Thank you.
Ditto to everything you said, Roger. Roger, I have a couple questions for you, and then Randy, I wanted to talk to you about SB 200. I'm glad you brought that up. First of all, I share many of the concerns that the chair mentioned, co-chair mentioned about legally enforceable flows and the timing of that with respect to the BDCP. And I'd like to, I think that that's going to be a major stumbling block. And I was disappointed the governor came out with his letter today and reinforced your position. That's, I think that we're all going to have trouble with that. I think that's clear. So there's more to be discussed there. I would like to know about the participation of local stakeholders in the process. You heard NRDC. You've heard me talk about it. We'll hear shortly. But what plans are there to expand a little bit this process?
Senator Wolk, I think that more of that needs to occur. I mean, this is not my first time working on one of these, and I'm a big proponent of doing that. I'm spending Monday night in Clarksburg next week, and this won't be my first time visiting with some
They
folks.
make great wine.
So we just need to continue to communicate and communicate better on this. There's been forums set up to try to get more of the input from the counties, and just have a general dialogue. It's not like, well, we need their input so we know what to do. In fact, we need to talk together to figure out what to do. So I think the BDCP, I know people say, oh, it's not a very transparent. It is a hugely transparent process. I mean, like I say, I've done a lot of these, and I mean, everything is on the web, and all the meetings are open, et cetera. The problem is you got to have a ton of patience, because the meetings are like this. They're all, they're long, and there's lots of information, and you have to have the ability to participate, and people have jobs. I mean, not everybody is a paid staffer for water agencies or fishery agencies that can do that. So it is always a challenge to do that. I support trying to do it. I try, on behalf of Metropolitan as a steering committee member, try to visit with the county folks and other folks and make sure we're understanding each other. I believe what has been said, and that is, I don't care how good of a plan we come up with, whether it's the BDCP or the Delta plan, you aren't going to get to first base if you don't find a way to work with the people that live in the area where things are going to occur. I know that.
I appreciate that, and I know that you've been active, and you've believed that, and your agency has acted that way for a long time, and has recognized the importance of the Delta for a long time. Self-interest or not, the point is other agencies haven't. So I do want to ask you, though, following up on Samidian's questions about financing, the operation and maintenance of these organizations, not to mention the levies, but the organizations that we're trying to set up is a real issue. Who pays for that? It won't come out of bond funds. We know that.
Let's say how do we pay the administrative costs of a council or a conservancy?
Council, conservancy, Delta Protection Commission expansion.
We need to figure out how to do that. One of the things I would like to work with you on the Delta Conservancy bill is, I agree with what Kim Delfino said earlier. I want to make sure we understand how it can help implement projects on behalf of BDCP. And I think once you kind of get up and running, if we say we want the Conservancy to implement a $50 million project of some kind, then it seems to me it makes sense that there's some administrative fee, that comes out of the $50 million to keep things running. That's kind of, once you get a program and you're up and going, it's pretty common to do that. We might need some funds to ante up to start with to get the agencies up and running, and I'm not sure how we do that. I guess that's part of the challenge. I don't know that that's a huge chunk of money, but in this day and age, any chunk is huge, I guess.
And continued investment in the levees, particularly if it's a dual conveyance system that comes out of this, your agency is prepared to support that?
My view is that we cannot walk away from the levees in the Delta. I think Delta Vision had an idea that we need to have DWR or somebody pursue, and that is to really think through the strategic investment plan, so that we kind of look area by area and who are the beneficiaries of that, and if it's the broader state as a whole, fine. To walk through that and really figure out how we're going to make those investments in the future, because things, it's not going to be today like, in the future like it is today. Things are going to change, and we can either kind of manage with it or we're going to be playing catch up. So I think getting the strategic investment plan for the levees is important.
I only have a couple more questions, two questions actually, and one of you, and that is what I said earlier about whether storage or infrastructure, these things will not be built tomorrow. So my question to you is in terms of emergency preparedness. If tomorrow there were a major earthquake and that interfered with your water supply, what would you do? What would happen to
Well,
your
that
resident?
is a very good question, and as you recall, it's about 2.5 years ago, I think Lester Snow testified and showed the pictures of what the Delta could look like. That caught our board's attention, and we did a lot of work at Metropolitan looking at emergency preparedness in the Delta, and the plan that is being implemented now, the stockpiling of rocks, sheet piling, pre-contracting, those kinds of things, that by and large was a plan that we developed and DWR then picked up. It's not the best plan in the world, but our view is that within 6 to 9 months after a major event, 6.5 earthquake, that you could at least patch things together in the delta enough to make them work for certain local functions and a part of the state's water supply. It's not the best, but there is a plan in place for emergency preparedness.
Thank you. And just one comment to Mr. Knaus. I enjoyed your comment about SB 200. I just looked at that the other day, and you said that this package is much better than that bill. That was the bill authorizing the peripheral canal, and not authorizing authorizing the peripheral canal that was later referended in '82, SB 200. When I read it, I was shocked at the fact that the assurances in here with respect to water issues were in fact greater than the ones we have incorporated into our package, and I'm going to circulate it to those in the package because I think there's some things here that Senator Cogdill, I think you would be particularly interested in. There were requirements prior to a peripheral canal that there would be 400,000 acre-feet that would be in groundwater storage. There would be also storage as well. There were areas delineated, such as the San Joaquin Valley, Southern California, South San Francisco Bay, and other areas. And when they talked about construction of facilities, I was surprised to see that there would be no construction of facilities without the restoration and maintenance of the adult populations of fish. Zeke, this one's for you. The restoration of fish to historic levels from 22 to 67. And then the department shall enter into permanent and enforceable contracts with Delta agencies for the purpose of recognizing the right of users to make use of the waters of the Delta, establishing criteria for the minimum quality of water which shall prevail within the Delta before water may be exported. These are all conditions for the approval of the CAL that were in the 1980 bill. And those agencies there are 10 of them. North, Central, South Delta, Contra Costa, Sassoon, others that don't exist any longer. I think there's a lot to learn here. We have a ways to go.
Senator Wolk, I may not have been clear enough in my comments. What I was intending to say is that this package is more far-reaching.
Yes, it is.
Is
I
more
agree.
bold.
That's what you
and
did
touches on all water right holders and visionary, Senator.
And bold.
Buckley. And bold. But you're absolutely right.
Oh.
And at the risk of offending most of you sitting up there, I'm going to say it anyway. I had dinner last night with an old friend who has now retired and worked in water for many, many years. And he asked me about the package, and he said, well, you know, what are the size of the canal and what are the conditions? And I said, well, it's being handled through the BDCP. And his question was, well, the legislature would never give up that authority, never give up that responsibility for making those determinations, those bookend determinations. And my response was, well, this package takes a different approach. But you raise very important considerations. And my final comment is, please take this show on the road. Let Californians across the state talk to you and get their arms around this and understand it, and you can fix this package.
Thank you, Mr. Knaus. All right, so Senator Cogdill and Assemblymember Berryhill have quick questions, comments to wrap us up on this panel and help move us to public comment.
Yes, it's time for the quick Republican questions, so very sure you get.
They love storage.
My question, I wanted to talk a little bit about this issue of stream flows, and obviously we've, I think, done a pretty good job just today of trying to understand what it's going to take to get that work completed to where we know what those stream flows should be. And my take on all that, I wanted to get your opinion, Mr. Patterson, on the role that above stream surface water storage plays in that whole issue of maintaining stream flows, if you will. Obviously, once we establish that level, that's going to determine how much water that we can export out of the Delta. So would it be important from the standpoint of security of the system and the economy of the state and the viability of the environment to have additional storage so that in the wet years we can put that water away, whether it's in Sites Reservoir or in Temperance Flat or a system such as that feeds into the Delta? Do you see those as important infrastructure improvements that need to be made to, again, maintain stream flow?
Senator Cogdill, I think we're going to need to make those kinds of investments, and because as we try to put this plan together to meet the co-equal goals, it's going to be strung pretty close. I think we can do it, but as things continue to change on us, and we see the snowmelt hydrograph change, and have more rainfall and less snowpack, we're going to need to add to the backbone storage system to make this work. So I believe that will be important to do, and it will allow us to really take that variability in the hydrograph from year to year and help meet these co-equal goals as we go forward. We have storage now that we're not able to access in Shasta and Orville just because of the situation that we're in. And so storage is a pretty key part of making this work, and also storage south of the Delta, which Metropolitan's invested a lot in. For us, it's a way of helping meet the take it when there's plenty and lay off when there's not. It allows us to do that. So we need to make those kinds of investments, and we've made some of those ourselves, but we're going to need a more statewide view.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Berryhill?
Yeah, thank you. This is kind of to Roger, I suppose, but I'd like to hear brief comments from all the panel. You talked about flows and being able to flush the system and whatnot in your opening statements, and there's been a lot of talk today about the ecosystem, the co-equal goals of reliability and whatnot. But I guess my question to all of you is, can we realistically move forward on any of this stuff without storage being on the front side of this thing rather than the back? Because it seems to me, if we had additional storage as we sit here today, that would fix part of the problems of the salmon and all the other endangered species. If we had the ability to catch that water in big years and be able to release it in drought years, and I'd like to get everybody's comments a little bit on that, on the storage part of this package.
Senator Berryhill, let me start off. This is my view, and that is that we don't need to make those investments before we start doing things, because as I said to Senator Cogdill, we have storage now that we are not able to take advantage of because of the situation in the Delta, and having more storage without fixing conveyance and doing the habitat and the other things we need to do will not get away from this sideways flow that we talked about earlier, where the current system is just plumbed in that way. And so if we're going to make those co-equal goals work, we got to do a lot of work in that regard, and then we need to make the investments. But I don't think we need to have storage online before we make those, because we can get started. Will we need it? Yes.
Okay. Then having said that, then would it not make sense to do this all as one big comprehensive package?
Well, I suggested in my testimony that I think, in fact, we need to do that. I think we need to see if we can hammer through this. And, you know, unlike Randy, I drive a car that's a 1974, and I've kicked the tires on it a lot, and we've kicked the tires on this for 20 years, and I think we need to get on with it.
Thank you. I would say I agree with a lot of what was said. I think when you look at the prospects of the loss of snowpack and what the state will need to do to meet environmental and water reliability goals, it's obvious storage and a whole range of other investments is going to be required. When we asked the folks who are kind of doing all the modeling what kind of what we'll call systemic operational modeling embeds storage and other investment options into the formula, and it's really just not being done that way. And I would say that there is time, while these existing studies are being done, to really optimize how the state spends its money to yield the biggest benefits. And I can't, we're kind of new entrants into this, and so we kind of took a fresh look and asked people, well, show us the studies. What do you really have? What are the costs? How does it work? And there were really a lot more unanswered questions than we would have assumed there would be. But these aren't unsolvable things. But I think that it just does need a fresh look. I think there should be investment put up, and I think there should be a mechanism so the state invests the money wisely. But there's going to need to be investment to make it happen.
Randy.
Mr. Berryhill, my board works hard to make sure that we can deliver the highest quality water at an affordable price to our customers. And East Bay Mud's board, for as long as we have been having these discussions, several decades really, over the Delta and new storage, our position has been we will support and pay for those state programs that benefit our customers, that we have a responsibility for. If there's a determination that there are certain projects that have a public benefit, a benefit that's widely experienced across the state, across the watershed, we have a responsibility in sharing for that. But for those water projects, be it a canal, be it a new surface storage, that does not provide a direct or a public benefit to our ratepayers, we are not supportive of moving that project forward. And so the whole debate about surface storage, we've been supportive of a measure that ensures that those communities that are going to derive benefits are prepared to pay for those benefits up front. Under those terms and conditions, we would be supportive of a storage component.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just think it's imperative that as we move forward with a big package, it has to be comprehensive, and you got the cart before the horse, or vice versa. So as we move forward, and as hopefully we do committee hearings all over the state, I think that the conclusion will be that you need to do all together, but you can't do one without the other, in my opinion. So I do want to thank you guys for coming here today and all the help that you've been over the last couple of years.
And the final question for this panel, real briefly, Assemblymember.
Thank you, Senator Pavley. I just had a quick question about, we heard from Mr. Knaus about somewhat slowing this down or increasing the process. This question is for Mr. Levine, who I wanted to give points to about talking about the tri-equal goals. I think you're the only one that I'm going to give a point to on that during the entire day. But what's the perspective? I sense you're coming more from a quote-unquote business perspective. What's the sense out there in the business community about the process?
I think we believe that while answers on specific projects probably aren't there yet, the design of specific projects and which storage solution really works the best, there is already a consensus out there that we need to fix the governance and decision-making process. So as these studies come in, right decisions can be made, and investments in the right levy investment formulas, investments in the right environmental recovery projects, and all those things can happen sooner rather than later. So I would say I would disagree that we need to, on a conceptual level, debate this for another year or two. There may be parts of this that may be too hard to tackle this year, and that's up to you guys.
But do you think we should go on the road? That's my question. With the process.
I can't really tell you how to do your job. I would just say that we think you need to move to some...
Why not everybody else does?
I thought I had a hard job, but I don't. I realize now. But, I would say, look, whatever you feel you need to do, as long as you can move the elements we've identified, and, we've identified some of them already, you can move those to the goal line pretty quickly. And, I don't think you need to go and spend the next year doing that, in my view.
All righty. Again, thank you very much. Very interesting testimony. Before we go to public comment, just want to remind people here that this is the first of the hearings tentatively. We scheduled one for next Tuesday, where we will be specifically focusing on the bills, or the how are we putting legislative package of bills. tentatively also next Thursday, but definitely next Tuesday on Delta bills. If you have written testimony, either now or between now and Tuesday, please submit that either to my office or Assemblymember Huffman's office, and we will distribute that to all members of the committees. And as far as public comments, I can see by the line forming over there, we're going to use that microphone. That will be it. I would like you to limit your testimony to 2 minutes, and I want to apologize ahead of time. If you see me get up and leave, you're in good hands. Senator Woke will be continuing the hearing to allow you to get your opinions on record. We're trying to focus on solutions and moving forward in this process, and anything you can do to limit redundancy would obviously be very, very helpful. Thank you very much. Mr. Minton?
Good afternoon. Jonas Minton with the Planning and Conservation League.
Is that on? I'll have to ask.
Does it appear to be on?
Yeah.
Jonas Minton with the Planning and Conservation League. We do not agree with the notion that the legislature is incompetent to deal with fundamental water policy decision making and must defer this to a politically appointed commission. At the same time, we don't believe that you have sufficient information that's been presented to you, including in this hearing, on what the real choices are. Let me just observe. Today, the representative from the California Department of Fish and Game did not disclose to you, nor did he share with you the vast amount of information that has already been collected at taxpayers' expense, going back 2 decades on the freshwater needs of the Delta. This is not a new subject, as you've heard from many people. No one from DWR would share with you the costs for these conveyance facilities, a canal as large as a peripheral canal, or a tunnel potentially as large or larger than the channel from France to England. Fish and Game did not provide you any cost estimates for restoring tens or 100,000 acres of land. And lastly, no one has laid out for you a financing plan. How can you make sound decisions without having any idea, is this $5 billion, $10 billion, or $40 billion? There are 3 specific recommendations I offer for you today. The first is that you require the California Department of Fish and Game to bring in their existing data on that question that all of you have touched on, what's the freshwater needs of the Delta? Secondly, look at a realistic financing plan. We've seen what happens in the past when we have great expectations, pass laws, and then find we cannot fund them. And third and last would be to heed the admonition of Mark Franco from the Winnemem Wintu. Let's look at the whole body and healing it. And in that line, the Environmental Water Caucus, a coalition of 22 organizations, has just prepared, yesterday released, Conservation Solutions Now, California Water Solutions Now, that we've just handed out to you. It's very fresh, it's very new, and it's very consistent with many of the recommendations of the Los Angeles County Economic Corporation. We'd like to have you work with us on those actions that are reasonable and feasible, get those answers, find out how much it's going to cost, who's going to pay for it, and move ahead. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. And we got a copy of those booklets and reports that you referred to. Name and affiliation, if you have one. 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name's Steve Evans. I'm Conservation Director of Friends of the River. I appreciate the opportunity to comment today. It was asked earlier whether it's feasible to achieve these co-equal goals, and although certainly that's a laudable political goal, I think it's going to run smack into the biological reality that we've taken too much fresh water from the Delta, and we're going to have to give some of it back. And for the large number of people south of the Delta who define water supply reliability as increased Delta exports or at the minimum continued Delta exports, that's going to be a problem. I have to also ask why these bills, and I concede that they don't specifically authorize a peripheral canal, but they certainly enable a peripheral canal, and why we would want to enable Governor Schwarzenegger and his Department of Water Resources, which is deliberately and repeatedly broken our environmental laws, why we want to, why the legislature would want to give this decision to him. By all means, retain that decision. You know, get the studies done, figure out what the Delta needs in terms of water, but don't give this to somebody else. I think it's important to take a look at even some of the proponents of a peripheral canal have expressed concerns. The Public Policy Institute of California determined that there is only a 50% likelihood that the Sacramento River salmon population, which is the mainstay of the commercial and sport salmon fishing industry in this state, will remain viable with the peripheral canal. It's 1 in 2 chances. Really? Are we really restoring this ecosystem if we're going to create something that will only give a 1 in 2 chance of survival for the Sacramento River salmon? A recent scientific evaluation of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan found that the benefits of delta habitat restoration may be offset by the negative impacts of the peripheral canal diversion on the Sacramento River system.
And if you would just finish that one more sentence and you're done. And
so, a lot of things. I'll be here at the next hearing. Good. I hope you'll have more hearings because there's very limited time at this point.
And if you'd like to submit written comments, we welcome them.
Catherine Gray, Palo Alto. Earlier today, Mr. Simidian, I get nervous. He stated that the legislator has an abysmal 9 to 11% approval rating, and that he hoped his packet of Delta bills would change our opinion. That's not likely. These incomplete, rushed, cobbled-together bills are a poster child for what's wrong with Sacramento. These bills establish an unaccountable committee who will be funded by every water user in the Sacramento watershed, whether they benefit or not. These bills upset historical water rights, including those of riparian users. Despite Protect Delta lip service, there is neither funding nor standards set to protect the Delta. These bills do not address, nor do they fund needed levee repair. Please slow down and take the time to do it right. Don't give your legislative responsibility away. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Robert. Hold on.
You're good. Just raise it. Yep.
My name is Robert Johnson. I'm organized a group called StopCanal.org. And my comments are, A, why aren't we immediately evaluating the pace of agricultural expansion in the San Joaquin Valley? A recent report by the U.S. Geological Survey showed that there was a net draw of 60 million acre feet of groundwater. That's a net drawdown from 1961 to 2003, the latest that study went, and that was deemed to be conservative. That's in addition to the record surface storage, the increasing surface storage deliveries. So that basin has been growing at a pace that's just clearly unsustainable. When are we going to step back and say, what's a sustainable pace of development of agriculture in the San Joaquin Valley? It's clearly, to me, if we have a net draw of 400 feet in their aquifer, what's next? With that, are we going to stop? What happens when they stop doing groundwater draws? That's 1.4 million acre feet. Further, West Side contractors are negotiating with the feds for what would be deliver hundreds of billions of dollars in giveaway of public trust resources. In exchange for their taking on the San Luis drain toxicity, they are negotiating to get half of their $500 million debt owed to the government for the Central Valley Project forgiven, plus a permanent water contract to purchase subsidized water for less than $100 a foot. Why are we having water districts having the ability to make hundreds of millions of billions of dollars? Why do we think the West Side contractors are going to be growing in the future if they are able to secure this agreement? Or will they, because they're going to be responsible for cleanup of the toxicity? Well, obviously, a rational person will conclude that they will stop farming, which is where we should be in the first place. The drainage-impacted lands should be ceased, and that would provide a lot of water for the Delta. What's going to happen is we turn them into a private, so it's a water privatization empire. And our water districts should be utilities, not water empires. And the state legislators need to know very clearly that this is a water privatization effort, and this astroturfing campaign that's dividing us and making fun of a 2-inch fish and just going around the country and making fun of Bay Area and referring us as radical environmentalists. This is divisive, and that's at the heart of this water policy that you guys are looking at right now. We can come up with 21st century water solutions that will provide, and we can diversify the San Joaquin Valley's economy, because that's what it needs to do. It's time for that region to get off expansion of agriculture.
Just finish that comment. Thank you. Next person.
Build anything.
Thank you. My name is Joe Gray. I'm from Palo Alto, a engineer, retired CEO, and I would like to say that when I read the bills, there was a big part that was missing, and I'm actually pleased to hear that it was addressed by many of the people presenting here. I'd like to reinforce what Professor Mount and Mr. Knus earlier said. The first step in meeting the co-equal goals of protecting the water supply and protecting the delta is to fix the levees. We have heard the doom and gloom of 2 out of 3 chance that there will be a catastrophic levee failure within the next 50 years, a failure that will kill the pumps, destroy the delta. We can't let that happen. It's not good for fishermen. It's not good for farmers. It's not good for anybody. And it wasn't in the bills. The levee failure can be avoided. The PPIC study says all we need to do is reinforce the 5 western islands to seismic no-fail standards. That can be done at a much lower cost than a peripheral canal. It's something that we can start a lot earlier than anything like a peripheral canal. And it's also much less cost than a catastrophic failure. Here's your chance to save taxpayer money. There's already Proposition 84 and 1E funds should start going. So rather than rushing through in 2 or 3 weeks this big plan, no matter what its merits are, I'd like to see at least in 2 or 3 weeks something in the package to protect the delta, protect the farmers, protect the fishermen, and fix the levees now. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next person, next speaker.
Hi, my name's Dan Bacher. I'm editor of the Fishing Info magazine. I'm a recreational fisherman, and I agree completely with the comments, very moving comments of Mark Franco of the Winneman Wintu Tribe and Zeke Grader of the Pacific Coast Federation of Fishermen's Association. I have 3 points to make. Number 1, we need to slow the legislative package process down. There is no need for haste, especially when we haven't figured out what the needs in terms of water of the are for the fish in the ecosystem of the delta. Number 2, we need to make sure that all delta interests, including delta farmers, California Indian tribes, recreational fishermen, and commercial fishermen, are fully integrated into the process and ask for their input into this legislation. Third, I strongly oppose any type of stewardship council where the majority of the council members would be appointed by the governor, who has made it a big project of his administration to build a peripheral canal that would rival the Panama Canal in length and width. Fourth, I impose the inclusion of the BDCP in the legislative package, because this is a corporate greenwashing process that was instituted by the governor to push a peripheral canal through. Thank you very much for listening to me today.
Thank you for your testimony.
Good afternoon. This is Robert Dolezal with the
Get a little bit closer, please, to the mic. Thanks.
Good afternoon. This is Robert Dolezal with the California Association of Nurseries and Garden Centers. A comprehensive plan is what is needed. It needs to be based on science, as Senator Simitian said, echoed by Jeffrey Blount later in the afternoon and by several other people that spoke today. That science is not there. The waning days of this session is a rush to judgment on this package, and we strongly believe that you need this comprehensive plan in order to get all the pieces of this right with full input from citizens around the state. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Jim DeBoo on behalf of the City of Los Angeles and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power.
LADWP serves over 4 million customers, and this equates to approximately 11% of the residents and businesses in California. We have always been and will continue to be deeply committed to water use efficiency and innovative water management, and have achieved great success. Namely, since the early 80s, the city's population has grown by more than 1 million people without using one additional drop of water. We currently receive approximately 45% of our water from the Delta in an average year, and expect to continue to rely on roughly the same amount. As been stated before, we're not looking for more water, but we're looking for more reliable supply. The City of Los Angeles supports this comprehensive package that aims to achieve co-equal goals of water supply reliability and ecosystem restoration, and that respects the Delta residents, communities, and economy. And as this process goes on, we look forward to working with you and the committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Melinda Terry, the Executive Director for the Central Valley Flood Control Association. So as you can imagine, I'm pleased that levee maintenance and flood management was an issue that got brought up by many speakers today. But I here because I am a little disappointed that we weren't included in a panel, because we do think we're an important part of the solution. And I should mention, so I said Central Valley is our association. We have members, reclamation districts and flood management agencies from Chico all the way down to the Tracy area, including the Delta. But it's all one flood system. And so we think it's really important. I'm on the BDCP steering committee for actually the North Delta Water Agency. And I make this comment to them fairly regularly, which is, and Jeff Mount made it last week, which is, this was a flood control system first, okay? And it became a convenient water system later. I think it can be both, but we need to pay attention to the first in order to protect the second. It is critical, and it's part of the co-equal goals, too, because we have a lot of habitat that is protected, as well as a lot of other values for the state. You may not know, the Sacramento region has the lowest flood protection of any river city in the nation. We didn't used to be last, but I'll show the little graphic. We are last now because of Katrina, because, of course, once you have a big levee failure, then they come in and they fix your levees, and you're much better off. If you look at the graph in the other river cities in the green, Tacoma and St. Louis and Dallas and other river cities, and then you see the red, which is Sacramento, we're way below everyone else. So this is a significant risk to all these other values, including the habitat and the water supply reliability. California's had major floods in 1955, 1964, 1986, 1997. Now, do you notice a theme? There's a couple themes. They're almost every decade. The other thing is they end in a 4, 5, 6, or 7. We have a consistent theme going on there. There wasn't one in 1977. We had a major drought.
And if you could finish that thought, and we'll move on. But
people die as well, so I really want us to think about the public safety as well as the value that we can give to the water supply reliability. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing the flood perspective to our attention.
Good afternoon, Chair Pavley, esteemed members of the committee. My name is Rob Fong. I'm a city council member here in the city of Sacramento, your adopted hometown. And I bring you greetings from the city. We will have a letter weighing in on this officially, but I wanted to sit here with you this afternoon. I appreciate the hearing. It's both interesting and mind-numbing all at the same time. And I realize there's a lot of work to do. But I wanted to express to you in person that the city of Sacramento recognizes the economic and environmental importance of the Delta and strongly supports efforts to restore and protect the ecosystem and improve statewide water supply reliability. From a broader perspective, the city believes that a renewed emphasis on stewardship of water resources and development of alternative water supplies should be a statewide priority. The city supports principles that protect and restore environmental resources, improve and maintain Central Valley flood control systems, recognize regional climate and hydrologic differences relative to water rights and water conservation, so one-size-fits-all is not an appropriate approach, embraces regional self-sufficiency, and requires beneficiaries to fund improvements in long-term operational costs. The city's concerns are several, and I'd like to name them here. The city's water rights and entitlements and the biological resources of the American and Sacramento rivers need to be maintained and protected. It is important that the Sacramento region have fair representation in the development of Delta policies. The city and other Sacramento area jurisdictions must maintain local control and the right to provide the highest quality water supply at the most reasonable cost to its customers. And you should know that the city of Sacramento itself recognizes that it needs to be at the forefront in terms of developing a strong water conservation ethic. And we are very committed to that, and please have our assurance on that. The solutions to the state's water reliability challenges should not in any way offset efforts to achieve and maintain urban levels of flood protection for the Sacramento region. The city supports that concept that all costs should be allocated in proportion to the benefits received, the beneficiary pay concept, and that costs should not put unreasonable or impractical burden on the Sacramento region, and resources should be allocated to help finance or fund the participation in the solution by low-income communities. Water quality standards should be based on sound science, be protective of the resource, and be economically achievable. Lastly, the potential impacts to the city and the region must be considered on the same level as other stakeholders, including water exporter interests, the environmental, economic, and lifestyle factors differentiating this region from others in the state must not be compromised. And finally, the city and the region should have broad representation in the crafting of Delta and water supply solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, Councilmember Fong. No.
Good afternoon. My name is John Woodling. I'm Executive Director of the Regional Water Authority, and in that capacity I represent 19 water purveyors in the greater Sacramento region, including Yolo, Sacramento, Placer, and El Dorado counties, and serving about 1.5 million people, roughly the size of East Bay Mud. Just like we've heard the Delta is a place today, the greater Sacramento region is a place that has a quality of life and an economy that's dependent on reliable water supplies. There really has been little attention to the needs of the Sacramento area and other upstream urban users in this whole Delta process. And I think that's reflected in the panel today that had the biggest diverter, exporter from the Delta, and one of the biggest bypassers of the Delta in their system, taking the water from the headwaters to the Bay Area. So we want to be engaged in a solution. We want to work towards a solution. We certainly have concerns about water rights. I was happy to hear Senator Pavley today affirm the commitment to the water rights system and area of origin protections. With the lack of clarity and detail in the bill, though, and the setup of the council, you can see why people would be a little uneasy about water rights in the future. The Water Conservation Bill, AB 49, I think is a one-size-fits-all approach. I don't think it can optimize the benefits we can get from where and when we can use water that's conserved. And we heard Lester Snow say that we need to take a portfolio approach to water management. And in a portfolio approach, I think the local agencies need the flexibility to figure out where conservation fits into their portfolio. They don't need to be mandated that 30% junk bonds is part of their investment portfolio. And then finally, I just want to draw attention to the Sacramento region. Throughout the 90s, 40 signatories, environmental groups, water purveyors, business, community groups, developed and then signed the Water Forum Agreement. And we came up with co-equal objectives that we didn't copyright, unfortunately, because they're the same as the co-equal objectives of Delta Vision. But we solved that water supply environment on the Lower American River mix locally here, and we think we can do the job through local and regional management. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And if you wanted to take the time to submit any comments you have in writing, we welcome them. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Daly, and I'm from Clarksburg. I live in the Delta, and thank you for giving me a voice. I represent Northern California farmers in a way that I own land out there in the Delta. But I also stand today with the Indians and with the fisher people and with the boaters and speaking with you this afternoon. First of all, I'd like to say, please stop contracting out and privatizing our public water. Next, I would like to say that I've heard a lot about conserving water today, and that everyone agrees that not enough has been done to look at how we can conserve our water. And I'd like to bring up an article I read in the San Francisco Chronicle recently, written by Kelly Zito, where she was talking about a study done by Peter Gleich from the Pacific Institute, where he stated that his study showed that if every California farmer, where appropriate, would put in a drip system, that we would save enough water to fill the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir 16 times every year. And I was wondering if something like that could be looked into further in a way that we could help get water to everyone in California. The last thing I'd like to say is not only is the Delta smelt going extinct, but the Northern California farmer is going extinct. And I'd like you to please think about the person, the humanity, the communities, our schools, our churches in this, that will be going extinct and will be gone. They will implode should our water be diverted out of the Sacramento River. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Steve Hayes, and as a form of introduction, I've been involved with the CalFed program, state of California, in the Upper San Joaquin River watershed. I work for a resource conservation district that encompasses the Upper San Joaquin River as well as the Kings River watershed. And I get around. I have an opportunity to meet with various constituencies, and I had the opportunity to participate over the weekend on that flotilla. And I think the most impressive aspect was seeing the tractor on the barge, the red old tractor on the barge. And it reminded me when we talk about constituencies and we talk about the Delta and CalFed program that there are places that need to be recognized culturally, socioeconomically, as well as in the context of water and the importance of water here. And there are three major communities within the Central Valley, and that is obviously where I'm from, the San Joaquin Valley, up to the north, the Sacramento Valley. And what's been overlooked until now with this body of legislation, this joint committee, and this hearing open and transparent to all the people of California is the Delta and what that represents to the state of California. It's also the weakest link of a system, a massive system of infrastructure and natural rivers and streams. And people have been trying to make this a fish versus people kind of issue, but I see it as farmers in those three regions, farm workers in those three regions, and their communities, their economies. And so it's not fair, if we're looking at this in the fullest context, to just look at our own self-interest and our own constituencies. And I thought that Mr. Berryhill started to open that up in Mr. Cogdill in respect to it. And Mr. Arambula has been dealing with this back where I live.
And I'm going to have to ask you to just finish that one sentence in about 30 seconds.
So I think this is a good opportunity in which to build from, to look at how to solve our problem here, not fix it, but solve our water problems and help all of our communities throughout the state of California. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair and members, Barry Broad on behalf of the Sacramento Regional Sanitation District.
I wondered why you were here. I was trying, I couldn't
just can't keep
point
my
out the client.
greedy little fingers out of every issue.
I couldn't figure out why the Teamsters or the UFCW
well, they'll
were
probably
engaged.
be along here shortly. So anyway, our board has taken a support if amended position. Now that's sort of an unusual position, but what it really conveys is we think that this ought to be the little engine that could, not the little engine that couldn't. There's a lot that militates against you folks collectively putting this together, everything from term limits to partisan differences to the cost, the economy, and so forth. But in the end, you really have to, and you have to do it soon. Because this is water is the lifeblood of every part of our society, and we are, unfortunately, in order to make a deal come forward, we can't view ourselves as separate warring camps. I mean, that's a sort of ridiculous way of looking at it. In terms of the bills themselves, our two major issues are that when it comes to this Delta Stewardship Council, regional government can be a good thing, but it also is generally intended to immunize the process from the normal political pressures that elected officials have. It's to diffuse that. And that can be a good thing when you're doing things that you know you need to do that are controversial. But it can also be something that removes the decision making from a connection with the people. It becomes a long-term irritant. And so it's important that this super board not take agencies like ours that have to, wow, that was fast, that have to follow state and federal laws and then turn those upside down after we're complying. Secondly, and I'll just finish really quickly, secondly, it's important that when you talk about mitigation, that it's good that the users pay, that's important, but the mitigation also needs to include not just environmental degradation, but the cost to some of these agencies who have to build systems that they wouldn't otherwise have to build because of what is done in this whole process. And that's how our agency is affected. So we urge you to move forward, and let's see if we can get this done. Thank you.
Yes, we've heard from several local agencies up here about improvements and who should pay. Next speaker. We have three more speakers.
My name is Mary McTaggart. I'm a resident of the North Delta. My parents in their 90s were small farmers on small parcels in Sacramento and Yolo County. They still live on their farm north of Clarksburg. I want to talk a little bit about farming. One of the bills says, just let me read this. It says the Department of Food and Agriculture will prepare a proposal for submission to the Commission to establish market incentives and infrastructure to protect, refocus, and enhance the economic and public values of Delta agriculture. There was similar language in the Delta Vision documents about how Delta agriculture would be reformulated or restructured or something to provide new public benefits. We still don't really understand what these public benefits should be. There was mention of carbon sequestration and other types of tule farming and stuff like that. But we have some concerns. One of them is that the state will walk in and say, well, now you have to farm this way from now on because you're in the Delta and we're taking over. And, our farmers are innovative. They are creative, they are nimble, and they know how their land works. So I hope that we won't become wards of this new governance. If we happen to be in the area of the Delta where farming is going to be done in perpetuity, as Dr. Mount said. He said that also at the federal forum the other day, and he had a chart on the board that showed inundation all the way up to where I live, which is north of Clarksburg. I'm not quite sure what he meant by that. Secondly, so this business about public values of agriculture, we thought it was a public value to supply food to the populace. But now apparently that isn't the case anymore, and we really need some more guidance on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the long day. My name is Jennifer Clary, speaking on behalf of Clean Water Action, and I'll put most of my comments in writing. And I just wanted to make a couple overarching comments, and one is that I think that the term co-equal goals needs a little bit more clarification because it means everything to everybody, and that means most people are going to be disappointed when it actually comes to fruition. So I think you might consider it. Also, when you only have two goals, you leave a lot of people behind. So I think there's a lot of third-party impacts that maybe need to have more care in this bill. The water issues I work on, which are mainly water quality, don't actually seem to have a lot of relevance to this bill, so I'd love to understand that. One unintended consequence of this bill package that I can foresee that may not come forward is overdrafting of groundwater aquifers in the Central Valley. If you're being forced to pay for the water you're diverting, you'll start taking it from underground. That's why Senator Pavley's bill is such a key piece of it. I wish it could go farther and perhaps tie more closely into the Bulletin 118 process, or also maybe it could help strengthen the GAMA process in the State Water Board, which is the groundwater quality process. Anyway, I'll put everything else in writing, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for staying so long to testify. And the last speaker.
Hi. My name is Kim Glazard. I'm with a group called Organic Sacramento.
You're with whom, sorry?
Organic Sacramento.
Thank you.
And as an environmentalist, I did want to respectfully disagree with the environmental panel here. I don't believe that it is possible to meet those co-equal goals of water reliability and restoration of the ecosystem. Because when you restore, are you working to restore the ecosystem of the Delta, you need fresh water. And when you take it above the Delta and outside the Delta, that defeats the purpose. Also, I wanted to mention that Steve Evans with Friends of the River had mentioned his concern that salmon serviceability is 50%, but this modeling is for a peripheral canal that assumes 40% less water diversion. As we know, that's not likely. There will be less water diversion. The result will be basically 100% of the salmon loss of salmon. There's so many critical things here. It's too quick. This is not really getting a lot of public attention, especially this current process with this committee. Conference committee. I think we need to slow it all down. It's too critical for California. That the Delta governance, putting Delta governance in the hands of 5 or 7 people, whoever they're appointed by, it's ridiculous. You know, that's 66% of California's water. It's too much. It's too much control, and we need a better system to work this out, and we need to slow it down, and we need to have time to figure that out, and we need to bring it to the people of California. I appreciate the work that you're doing, but I really also one other thing I wanted to say is that water allocations need to be reevaluated. If we're over, if we've got an over excess of water, allocations,
yeah.
Right, compared to the water that's available, that has to be readdressed at the get-go to begin with. And one more point I'll say is that how can we even consider a peripheral canal or something that could cost $10 to $40 billion when we just went through this horrendous budget crunch with just trying to mitigate $25 billion, but trying to mitigate $25 billion. I think this all needs to be looked at in a big way.
All good points. Thank you for your testimony. Thank everyone who stayed around to the very end. It's been a long day. We've heard a lot. Thank you to the members who, many of you stayed for many, many hours. We had anywhere from the 5 of us till over 20 members that shows the interest of what I think is really one of the very highest priorities our state should grapple with during the next few weeks and longer. So with that, thank you again for attending. We're adjourned, and we hope to be back on Tuesday. Thanks.